We turn now to the new research examining deaths in police custody in California and accusations that the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office has misclassified numerous deaths in recent years that actually involve physical trauma. It's an area that's faced more scrutiny in the wake of the death of George Floyd in 2020. And at the center of it all are families still grieving and searching for answers. Here's ABC's Morgan Norwood with this in-depth report.
That was my baby. He was a mama's boy, proud of it. He was a natural artist, knew how to write lyrics. He was also a rapper. And I'm not saying John was perfect, but John loved kids. Everybody took to him. He loved life. He felt he could do so much to help the youth because of what he'd been through.
It's been 13 years since Helen Jones lost her son, John Horton III. A mother still grieving, she keeps these pictures of John on her phone.
I hurt every single day that I get up. I know that my baby is gone.
Activists say John Horton's death was just one instance of a number of potentially misclassified deaths by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner. Dr. Terence Keel of UCLA analyzed 58 autopsies of jail deaths from 2009 to 2018. He says the findings were disturbing.
A carceral space should be one of the safest places in the world. Every single aspect of your life is controlled, from the time you wake up to the food that you eat to the air that you breathe. Carceral staff are constantly watching the inmates who are in the jail environment. But in reality, it's the exact opposite. One, we found that the overwhelming majority of people who died in Los Angeles County jails during this time period were African American men, followed by Latinx men. Most of these deaths were men who were under the age of 40 years. Half of them were classified as natural deaths.
The parents of former NFL player Stanley Wilson are filing a wrongful death claim. They say his death earlier this year in a mental hospital was suspicious, and they want answers. Eyewitness News reporter Jessica Lanova has more on the claim.
The parents of former NFL player Stanley Wilson Jr. want answers following their son's death this past February while in custody of the County of Los Angeles. They filed a wrongful death claim with the county.
We just want the truth. It hurts really bad, to bury your child.
Wilson Jr.'s father, also a former NFL player, describes his son as a meek, humble, fun, loving, charismatic man who attended Stanford University, suddenly becoming less social, withdrawn, anxious, depressed. Family says the former Detroit Lions cornerback suffered from chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, resulting from heavy impacts and concussions. The attorney representing Stanley's family says it all led to an arrest in August 2022 for trespassing.
Due to his mental illness, the county found him not able to stand trial, not able to provide assistance to counsel, and so they put him in the Twin Towers facility since August of 2022.
Half a year later, on February 1st, 2023, the call came. Stanley was dead, but his parents say why and how remains a mystery. The story changing from his cell at the mental health facility to the ambulance to the hospital. The family's attorney says marks on the 40-year-old's wrists and head tell a story of foul play.
There were fresh wounds to his forehead, which appear to have been caused by a shoe.
Ruling just about an hour ago, the Hart mothers intentionally took their own lives and the lives of their 6 adopted children.
This verdict comes after a second day of an inquiry into the deaths of the family from Woodland, Washington. A jury had to decide whether Jennifer and Sarah Hart died by accident or by suicide when their SUV drove off a cliff in Mendocino County, California.
A lot to unpack here. Let's send it over to KGW's Kyle Aboshi. He has the latest for us from the newsroom. Kyle.
The official verdict wording is that Jennifer and Sarah Hart died by suicide while their 6 adopted children, quote, died at the hand of another other than by accident.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the global system of white supremacy. Spirit of Lou Alcindor. Spirit of Jackie Robinson. Spirit of Bunchy Carter. Spirit of John Huggins. Spirit of Kimberly Randall King, all with us today full house, and today's date is April 6, 2026, so I have been told, Monday. But context, we are still April 4, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We did broadcast this past Saturday. But still, we are nearing 60 years to the assassination. That is important context. 60 years from when Dr. King was assassinated. That is important context for today, as well as that final audio segment. We did read We Were Once a Family about old Devontae Hart, all 6 of those adopted non-white children. It is 7 years, almost 7 years from the day, not to when they were drugged and killed, but 7 years to the day that the inquest concluded. Woo, when I started reading this here book, that language came to my mind immediately. At the hands of another, other than by accident. Are you out of your mind? What? And I told you when I heard that the first time, I said, at the hands of persons unknown. All of this is the context for our discussion today. And some of this you should know just from looking at the calendar. Oh yeah, Devontae, Sierra, Abigail, Patrick. It was 6 of them. I normally just do Devontae, right? So all 6 of them. All 6 of them. And starved them, drugged, and then come to all that, the conclusion of all that. They didn't even find Devontae's remains. Say, at the hands of another, other than by accident. Context. The audio that we heard to start, before we got to Devontae, we heard about Jonathan Hart, his mother, black female Helen Jones, talking about Mr. Hart, who died in a detention facility in Southern California. His mother, important efforts to recognize these unjust deaths in enforcement officer custody in LA and beyond, the difficulty even getting access to find out exactly what happened to your loved one, what happened to Mr. Horton. Even that can be a Herculean task. The second audio segment, we heard about the privileged black male Stanley Wilson Jr. I say privileged. Didn't they tell us black males who play the football and get all that CTE from banging up your brain, they say hey, you all got all the privilege and what have you. Everybody loves the old black male athlete. That's what they said, right? What? Stanley Wilson Jr., they say, get detained, and even it sounded like they had suspicions. Was he suffering from CTE, brain damage? Heard all this before. So Mr. Wilson also dies in enforcement officer custody, and they said he died with a boot print on his skull. How hard do you have to stomp someone to leave a boot print on their face, head? Black male privilege. And apparently they lock up lots of black dudes. We'll get to that as well. And then, of course, we heard the Hart piece at the end. It's lots of dastardly racist behavior throughout that whole ugly saga. Remember, Devontae was hugging on the police. Oh, so dastardly. But that whole thing did end in California, and it ended with that sentence, if you can even call it, it's almost a fragment, at the hands of another, other than by accident. Our guest for today's broadcast will help us unpack some of this madness and racism and this is a total compensatory effort. Gus T was struggling mightily, as is typically the case, privileged black male. Our guest was here, the great 206 Seattle. Look here, we were still basking, triumph of our Super Bowl glory. And he came up here, was going to tell us about all these black males dying in prison, Mr. Horton, Stanley Wilson Jr., all of that. I was going to be there. I was all excited to go, had told other people. And then, whammo, the plantation was really difficult. Plus, even more challenging, we did have a broadcast that day talking about white supremacy racism in Detroit, where they also lock up a lot of black males. So it was already a lot on my calendar for that date, and I ended up not being able to attend in person. I said, hey, we'll see if at minimum we can chat it up on the broadcast and try and compensate as best we can. That is our effort today. The book that we are chatting it up about, The Coroner's Silence. Could even leave it right there and just let folks marinate. But The Coroner's Silence, Death Records and the Hidden Victims of Police Violence. In addition to this text, our guest is a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. Congrats to the Lady Bruins just yesterday, where he teaches in the Department of African American Studies and the UCLA Institute for Society and Genetics. He's also the founding director of the UCLA Lab for BioCritical Studies and serves as the advisor for Structural Competency and Innovation for the UCLA Simulation Center at the David Geffen School of Medicine. Really looking forward to having him on the program. Reading more important than watching television, even the national championship. Yes, even the national championship. You saw what happened to Stanley Wilson Jr., so I mean, Joining us live to chat it up, thankfully he made it back safely from Seattle, our guest, Dr. Terence Keel. Dr. Keel, are you with us, sir?
Hello there. Thank you for having me on today. It's a real honor to be here.
Thank you for hanging out, sharing a bit of your Monday evening. Could have been doing all kinds of things down there in Southern California now that the weather is, well, I guess it's never really too bad, but could have been doing anything else but chatting with us. We are appreciative for you taking some time, sir. For our listeners, maybe this is their first time hearing about The Coroner's Silence and yourself. Anything you'd like to tell us about your work down there at UCLA before we get started, sir?
Well, I think it might be useful for your listeners to know that, I'm trained as a historian of medicine, science, religion, and most importantly, African-American history. So I think about a lot of things that weigh on us currently in our society. I'm a firm believer that history is never done with us, even though we may believe that we are done with it. And I think the better that we are able to understand how much the past informs the present, the greater the chances we are at designing the kinds of societies that we deserve. And so this is how I approach many of the things that I write and talk about. And this underlies the real kind of philosophy of the book we'll be talking about this afternoon, The Coroner's Silence.
Love it. We will get to it, cover as much as we can. For folks who have not seen you, you are classified as a black male. Is that true?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right on, right on. I guess before we get to The Coroner's Silence, can you tell us, you're the founding director, can you tell us about your work at the BioCritical Studies Lab?
Yeah, sure. So just as a way to get there, I've got family roots in Louisiana and along the Rust Belt, come from a long line of sharecroppers in Scott, Louisiana, and auto workers in the Ohio area, and a long line of black military men. And so I think that's important because I think about the kinds of work that I'm doing right now in a larger history of everyday black folks trying to survive and make it in this country, given the conditions of violence and oppression that are often stacked against them. The lab that I founded, the BioCritical Studies Lab, was really designed to help us think through how society influences our life chances. We often, carry in our imagination this idea that the genes that you get, the family history that you have, really kind of set your trajectory in life. And I disagree with that perspective. In fact, the laws within your city or county or state, whether or not you get access to health care, the kinds of jobs you have opportunities to get, whether or not you live on a contaminated soil or have clean air, these are the things that actually determine your life chances. And the better we are able to study and measure those things, it gives us more ways and more tools to make interventions to extend the lives of Black and brown and other politically marginalized people. So that's the philosophy of the lab. It was founded in the spirit of Frederick Douglass, who was one of the first Black American authors to write in a commencement speech that he gave at Ohio, actually, that we carry society in our bodies. And he believed that enslaved Black folks carried the institution of slavery in their bodies, and that you could see it, you could measure it. He saw it in other places of oppressed people, particularly among the Irish, who he was working with in his abolitionist effort. And so I carry that philosophy forward into the lab, and it's a guiding philosophy in the kinds of questions that we are interested in. And we've turned our attention to the influence of policing, violence perpetuated by police in the state, and most importantly, carceral systems, jails, prisons, detention centers that shorten people's lives, make us sick, and kill us.
Much obliged, sir. I appreciate he even placed himself geographically, Louisiana, roots of Black veterans. I think Memorial Day is next month, so Black veterans, that even comes up in the coroner's silence. Maybe I can even repeat the spirit of Jackie Robinson with us, World War II veteran, victim of white supremacy. What specifically was why did you choose this title for this work? I'll give the folks the full title one more time. The Coroner's Silence, Death Records, and the Hidden Victims of Police Violence. Why this title, Dr. Keel?
I think that we as Americans, and Black folks in particular, and people of color in general, we know that law enforcement, jails, and lawmakers who write conservative politics are part of the problem for why policing and incarceration has shortened the lives of Black and brown folks. I think we know that. It's been a central focus of the Black Lives Matter movement and the Civil Rights era struggle and the anti-lynching campaigns that Ida B. Wells and W. Du Bois and so many others have fought against, Fred Hampton, so many other truth seekers in our history. But I think what we have not paid attention to are the death investigators, the medical examiners, the coroners, who write the records after the state kills us. And what I discovered in looking at now over 1,000 autopsies of people who've died during arrest or in jail here in the United States is that the medical examiners are either outright manipulating records to cover for police, or they are holding their tongue. They are choosing to remain silent. And in that silence, a lot of information and a lot of distortion happens, and records are being written that practically blame us for our own deaths when we die in police custody. And so I wanted to focus our attention on the doctors and the physicians that we often think are these objective, truth-seeking people because they are trained in science and medicine. But there's a darker truth and a darker reality that we have to confront, and the only way to do that is to actually look at their work and to see the record of their silence and the consequences of our investigators not working for the people, but working against them.
Much obliged for the details, sir. Your response even reminded me of the scholar Harriet A. Washington, Medical Apartheid, the dark history of medical experimentation on African Americans from colonial times to the present. Very relevant indeed. And in fact, in that very book, she talks about at the beginning, she talks about so many things, but at the very beginning, she talks about the difficulty that she had in getting that work published, and even she encountered direct racist resistance where powerful white people, hey, what, Miss Washington, why are you trying to publish this and riling people up and bringing up old stuff? And come on, what are you doing that? Did you encounter anything like that in trying to bring us the coroner's silence?
Oh yes, brother, I did. I think one of the real tragedies, first off, I got to be grateful that my literary agent, Tanya McKinnon, who's a brilliant African-American editor who's been in the game for a long time, knew the right places to go for the book. But I've got to say that in our effort to figure out the right press, and we landed on the right press, Beacon Press is the press that published the book. It's published many of James Baldwin's work and Robin Kelly's and so many other people's work. We got the response from many presses that this focus was too narrow, or that the questions that the book are raising, there wouldn't be an audience for it. And I think one of the more difficult things to realize was that this was in the wake of George Floyd, right? And there was all of this momentum and protests. It was one of the largest protests in modern American history, if not the globe, because there was a protest on every single continent on the planet. And still, despite that energy and enthusiasm, there was inevitably, like many things happen in this country, a retraction back to the center or completely to the right. And so we had to grapple with the sort of narrow-mindedness and indifference to the kinds of tragedies outlined in this book that I thought and we thought needed to be told, and especially in a moment where we quite frankly have forgotten about our commitments to fundamentally changing the way the society thinks about policing, safety, and security in the wake of the death of George Floyd.
Another privileged black male, Mr. Floyd. That's fascinating, because I know it's for a brief moment. It's almost one of those where if you blink 5 times, you might miss it. But for a brief moment, there was a window. It was, hey, we can't keep the books like this on the shelves, and everybody wants them, and we're just selling, and white people are buying them, and black people, and college classes. For a brief moment, it would seem like there would have been some momentum, like, yeah, Dr. Keel, get that. Can you publish it today? Can we get 1,000 million copies? But it seemed like that didn't last very long. That was really quick, not long enough to write a whole book and get it edited, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think America, and as so many others have told us, Robin Kelly, James Baldwin, Eddie Glaude, so many, has a very limited capacity to look at itself and to understand where it struggles and what it needs to do. And I believe that that's not just a problem of white America, but I think it's a general problem. We have the distraction economy, and we are weathered people because we are, and we can get into this in a little bit, whether we realize it or not, our reality is not that different than the colonial unfreedom of slavery in the 19th century that Frederick Douglass has written about. And in that environment, there's not a lot of agency for us to free ourselves from these sort of conceptual constraints and these moral constraints that work against our own freedom. And so publishing this book was as much about trying to draw and summon our attention to the crisis as it was trying to wake us up to a dark reality that really confronts all of us. And that is, we have a policing institution that's out of control, and the people that we've hired to tell the truth about it are lying or remaining silent.
Context of White Supremacy. Dr. Terence Keel from UCLA. I guess for context, certainly if we're talking colonial times, 19th century, maybe even most of the 20th century, might be reasonable to suspect that most, if not all, of the coroners, death investigators, probably going to be white people, probably 99% of them going to be white dudes. Right now, 2026, what are the demographics, racial and gender, for coroners and death investigators in the U.S.?
Well, what I can tell you for certain is that in the 19th century, there was not a single coroner or medical examiner that I could find, because I went looking for them, who was black. So this didn't exist. Even after emancipation, even after Reconstruction, when black folks were able to create their own towns, their own cities, there were no black investigators. There were no black coroners or medical examiners. In the 20th century, in the early part of the 20th century, I also had a hard time finding medical examiners and coroners. If I were to give you a percentage in our current environment, it obviously heavily skews towards white Americans and particularly men. That isn't to say there are not African Americans who are medical examiners. In fact, the current medical examiner here in Los Angeles County is someone of African descent. But in terms of just raw percentages, I couldn't give you that exact figure, but what I can tell is historically it's been a position occupied by white Americans, and partly because it's such a powerful one. It has responsibility for investigating law enforcement deaths. It has responsibility for investigating pandemics and other things of public health. And so it's an agency, a department that has had a lot of power, and very often it's one that works for the county against the people. And so we're dealing with an institution that I think has been indebted to a certain kind of politics of white supremacy and racial injustice. And so it's not surprising that there have not been a lot of black folks and African Americans who have been in the role. And by the way, black faces in high spaces doesn't necessarily mean better death records and better investigation, because quite frankly, we are dealing with some real issues still here in Los Angeles County with the death investigators and the medical examiner system.
Wow. With, I guess currently, so 2026, even though you said, hey, we do have a non-white investigator down here in Southern California, what, I guess more specific than just system of white supremacy in general, what is the impediment that restricts this particular profession so that even now, very, very few black people get to this position?
I think we've got to look at what the office of a coroner or medical examiner actually does. And so what they do historically is that they investigate mysterious or untimely deaths that can either occur between two civilians or occur because of state violence, whether that's from police or some other agent of the state. Historically speaking, what death investigators did, and they were originally called coroners when they arrived here in the colonies in the 17th century, is that they investigated the deaths of people that the Crown of England had investments into plantations and other types of financial enterprises. And those people died in the colonies because a lot of Europeans died when they arrived here. And they made sure that assets were returned back to the Crown. After American independence, in 1776, the crowner became the coroner, and their job was to gather an inquest of free white male citizens, because they were the ones who counted. And those citizens in an inquest would determine who died, who was accountable, and who's supposed to be arrested. After emancipation, when black folks get the ability to grab the levers of power in our democracy, move towards a multiracial democracy where political pluralism is a reality, where power is not centered in the hands of white folks, but is widely spread, we begin to see states amend the laws that insulate coroners from everyday, regular folks, from the public. And that set us on a fatal trajectory that we are currently on, whereby coroners must be either under the rule and control and authority of law enforcement. So in the state of California right now, the coroner in Alameda County, where Oakland is under the sheriff's office. The coroner in San Bernardino County is under the sheriff's office. And what that means, when someone dies, they outsource an investigation to a physician. Or states require people to have medical licenses, medical examiners. So in Los Angeles, we have a medical examiner. It's a complicated system, but I think that reflects what the role really does. And that is this. If police are killing people, and families and communities want justice, want to bring lawsuits against the county, what is written in the death record makes a world of difference. If someone dies at the hands of police and the medical examiner decides to say, you know what, that person died from natural causes. They had asthma, they had hypertension, they had diabetes, they had mental illness or substance abuse. They write that death record and say that the death was a natural death. It makes it extraordinarily difficult for families to to bring lawsuits against police, to bring lawsuits against the state. And so when you look at the death investigator from that perspective, they don't really operate in the interest of the public. They operate in the interest of the elected officials that put them into power. And what I learned in writing this book is that most of the coroners or medical examiners don't run for office. They are appointed by some other political entity that determines how long they serve in that role. And in Los Angeles, just to give you an example, the largest police system in the world, or in the county, or in the country, and the largest jail system in the country, the same governing board that pays the salary of the medical examiner is the same governing board that pays the financial settlements for families who bring lawsuits against the county. So you can see the clear conflict of interest in making sure that you put a death investigator in power that's going to stack the deck in favor of police in the county and against everyday citizens. So I wanted to write a book about this because this is a system that isn't working for me or you or anyone else.
Fascinating. Well, we'll revisit that point in one moment about the system. Is it working for anyone in particular? You, and some of it you just kind of mentioned in giving your response there, Dr. Keel, where you were talking about how these systems differ even just in California, which is a big state, but Alameda County doesn't look quite the same as things do in LA, Southern California. Can you talk about the role of what that leads to, at least for me? Big D word, we've talked about this for all 17 years that we have been broadcasting. What is the role of discretion in your examination of the coroner's office?
Oh, wonderful question. So we looked at death investigation systems across the entire country. So we looked in California, we looked in other states. And what I was shocked to discover is that when someone dies at the hands of police, either during arrest or in jail, nearly every single state in America does not require an autopsy if that person dies. So what does that mean? It means that they can do an investigation. So they can go to the scene, interview police, interview witnesses. They might take some photos of things on the scene. But that is only half of what we need as the public to understand what goes on. An autopsy is more than an investigation. It involves doing an internal examination of the body, removing organs, looking for damages inside vital systems to see the effects of blunt force trauma or physical state violence, for example. It involves doing a toxicology report where maybe you would investigate if law enforcement said someone was under a controlled substance. A death investigator should do a toxicology report to actually confirm that they had drugs in their system. And so these are things that are crucial for a empirically driven, which is to say a scientific investigation into death. And yet when I looked across state laws, there are only 6 states in the entire country that require an autopsy when someone dies in police custody. That's in Illinois, Mississippi, Nevada, South Carolina, Virginia, and Wisconsin. Everywhere else in the country, either the autopsy is at the discretion of the death investigator or the state law doesn't specify it at all. That's a tremendous amount of power because then there is no immediate mechanism that can be triggered to do a thorough scientific investigation. And instead, going back to my earlier point, we're relying on people who are appointed by systems of government that are trying to protect themselves from the rule of democracy and the power of everyday folks.
Wow, I thought that was fascinating as well in terms of it not being standardized, and then the amount of power when I've said that D word, especially when it comes up in a law enforcement context. When you give a white person, the power, you can just make up whatever you like, case-to-case basis, whatever you think of the best, or whatever your conclusion is. Wow. I mean, it's going to be awful, and it's going to be lots of what I've even interpreted that sometimes is discretion. Sometimes what that means is feel free to practice racism. Whatever you can think of, use your imagination. What did I say in the beginning? At the hands of another by an accident.
Mm-hmm.
All kinds of creativity to make up in these positions. Is it goofy, I guess, or is there a reasonable, logical explanation as to why these practices have not been federalized?
Oh, good question. Well, that gets at the heart of one of the most important tensions in American democracy. You have states that have their own independent constitution, their own governor, and their own state legislator that write laws for the people. And then you have the federal government, whose job it is to provide minimal guidelines and standards that the states, because of the Constitution and the amendments of the Constitution, have to take seriously. Okay? But when you look at this particular question, there hasn't been any real federal leadership at creating standard practices for police reporting the names of the people that they kill. This is something that Congress has tried to do. The first time Congress ever decided, you know what, it would be a good idea if we track all the names that police kill, that wasn't until the year 2000. So prior to the year 2000, there was not a single federal, state, or county entity in the country that could tell you the names of every single person who's been killed by police. That means we are never going to know the names of everyone who died in the 1990s during the rebellions that we saw in places like Los Angeles, elsewhere. That means we're not going to know the names of people who were killed by police in the 1960s and the late 1950s with the rebellions in Detroit and in Watts and other parts of the country. We're not even going to know the names of all the people who were killed by police and other people unknown at the zenith of racial lynching in the 19-teens, because our government at the federal level never bothered to create the guidelines. And so I'm a firm believer we count the things that we care about. And it wasn't until Congress started thinking about this in the year 2000 that we got some sort of basic guidelines for tracking this information. But even that wasn't strong enough, because when Congress passed the Death in Custody Reporting Act, they didn't give a lot of money to the states to support it. They didn't even tell police what kinds of information they wanted to be gathered. So when we looked at the data from 2000 to 2020, it was a mess. It was all over the place. Names were missing. The races of people were unclear. The age and gender wasn't always obvious. The manner of death, how they died, wasn't clear. And so we have this sort of very weak federal guideline that the states exploit and take advantage of by determining for themselves how things are reported. And if they're not reported, there's very few consequences for police or the states. And so that's very troublesome. And I think we need a stronger federal mandate around this issue from Congress. But I also know that we need things from the ground up, because when the people in these various counties that are dealing with policing, whether it's in Seattle, right, whether it's in Oakland or Los Angeles, when the people from the bottom up put pressure on local officials, that's when things get done. And I'm a firm believer that's what we're going to need to change the system that's broken and failing all of us.
Context of White Supremacy. Again, speaking with the founding director of UCLA's BioCritical Studies Lab and the author of the Coroner's Silence, Death Records, and the Hidden Victims of Police Violence, Dr. Terence Keel. What was the role of discretion in the report on the death of Alicia Thomas, black female?
Yes. Alicia Thomas was a 30-year-old single black mother of 2 children who lived in Southeast Los Angeles. She was experiencing a mental health crisis around midnight and decided that she could not manage the crisis on her own with her children. So she took her children to the local police station, left them with a note and a basket of clothing. Law enforcement, rather than giving her children help or her help, surmised her address, followed her home, and she was dead within 10 minutes after they made contact with her. When the death investigator wrote her death record, they largely wrote a record that favored police. And so they put things in her autopsy that made it unclear what exactly happened to her. When you read her death record, they have statements that say law enforcement arrived at the home of Alicia Thomas, where she was combative and she was non-compliant. They attempted to put her into custody gently, and then she became unresponsive. What exactly does it mean to put someone into custody by not using a lot of force? Who exactly was responsible for doing this? How many officers were in the scene? What does it mean to say that she became unresponsive? Did they use force? Did they use pepper spray? Did they use tasers? None of these details were in the death record. And one would think that the final official word for how someone died, the final official moments of someone's last moments on this earth, that a person of science and medicine, of truth, would actually tell us everything that we need to know. And the medical examiner decided to be silent. And it wasn't until the family filed a lawsuit and we got dash footage of the patrol vehicle where Alicia was violently thrown into the car and was kicked multiple times in the abdomen that we began to see something that the death record didn't want us to see. She was experiencing a heart attack, and police are not trained to look for signs of medical duress, and they mistook her medical duress for non-compliance. She literally says multiple times on the camera, "I can't breathe and I can't move." They don't believe her, so they give her more force and they kill her in the back of the car and in the view of the camera. And so that type of silence worked to provide cover for police. And if it wasn't for the courage of her family and the willingness to say, we're not going to believe this record, we're going to contest this record, we would have never known about her story. We would have never known about all the omissions that the medical examiner made. And there's so many cases like Alicia Thomas that I write about in the book to show that this is not a single problem. This is a systemic problem that happens in counties all across the country all the time.
You include that I don't know, I guess you can correct me about the most accurate way to state this, unless I misread it. I thought they just flat out lied and suggested, oh yeah, and she suffered from sickle cell too, so she had all kinds of medical problems. Did they lie when they said that?
Oh yeah, because you can't die from sickle cell. And the thing is, they said she had a history of schizophrenia, substance abuse, where they coerced her mother to corroborate this story, which is a very common thing to happen. Family members are in the middle of crisis and grieving. They have police arrive at their doorstep. In that moment, people are incredibly vulnerable, and the intimidation of law enforcement is real. And so they got statements to help support this story. And then they added that she was a carrier of sickle cell trait, which is not sickle cell disease. To be a carrier means that one person in her family, either her mother or her father, gave her the genetic trait for the disease. But you can't get the disease if you only have the trait. You got to have both parents, right? And there's no literature anywhere to show that having sickle cell trait is a lethal condition. In fact, the same argument was made for George Floyd, that when the medical examiner looked at his blood and saw that it was sickling, they suggested that he too was a carrier of sickle cell trait, as a way of suggesting, there was something about her body. Her biology was off. It was wrong. Something about her blackness or his blackness was ultimately accountable for why they died. And that's how the medical and scientific racism can provide cover and a buffer for violence perpetuated by the state.
One, I want to acknowledge Dr. Keel. I don't know. I mean, he could say, hey, man, I am a professor at UCLA. I mean, I'm not a nobody. But I did super appreciate him taking the time to refute the racist nonsense that sickle cell is some kind of Negro defective disease and just black people. Like, it didn't even take a whole page or anything, just a quick paragraph that is nonsense, that there are lots of white people on the planet who also suffer from sickle cell. Like, come on. Thank you kindly. And then, is it true that this sickle cell lie, George Floyd, Miss Thomas, that this is pretty common when you begin to look at these police reports, that this will be given as, that maybe, they had the sickle cell, so maybe it was something about their body just failed them. Is it really listed that common on these reports?
It is, tragically. It is. We see it and saw it in our death records. The New York Times did a deep investigation showing numerous dozens of cases, particularly involving African American men who were subjected to violence by police, but the medical examiner made the argument that the person who died either had sickle cell or sickle cell trait, which are not the same thing, and that disease was a major contribution for why they died. And so, yes, it's very common. And again, if this office is designed to protect the state against the people, then medicine and science will turn to whatever biological defect that they believe exists in the black body or the body of a brown person or the body of someone who's not well, to ultimately come at a conclusion, hey, you know what? This person died from natural causes. I think it's impossible to die naturally during arrest. I think it's impossible to die naturally in jail or in a detention center. This is state violence, clear, plain, and simple. And we need our medical examiners to have the courage and the moral clarity to do their jobs and to not be silent.
Context of white supremacy. I do want to point out for listeners the death of Alicia Thomas. I won't say we, but many talk about white patriarchy and white men and the man. Unless I misread, this was Mary O'Callahan. This would be a white woman who's engaged in all of this violence. I think you even wrote in the book that they had to tell her, hey, whoa, the camera's on. Like, stop all that kicking and stomping. Behave yourself. Is that correct, Mary O'Callahan? Is this a white woman?
Mary O'Callahan is a white woman who was also a former Marine, which is quite common that many in the ranks of our law enforcement come from military and see everyday folks, not as citizens, not as civilians, but enemies. And tragically, that happened in the case of Alicia Thomas, where O'Callahan actually is even recorded on camera calling her a lard ass, and that trying to get Alicia to be compliant was like herding cattle. So all of the racist ideas that go back to slavery are in, tragically, Alicia's death. And again, we only know about this case because the family refused to accept the lie of the state and chose to fight this death record. So the question always becomes for me in the work of the lab, how many more Alicia Thomases are there? How many more George Floyds are there? How many more Sandra Bland's are there? And tragically, there are too many. There are too many. And we need to wake up and to see that this is a crisis hiding in plain sight.
Spirit of Kimberly Randall King. I remember she's a black female, black mom in Missouri, 2014, who died in police custody. Very similar, exactly what you just said, that how could a death in police custody be natural causes? That is the most unnatural context you can imagine, especially in a system of white supremacy racism, but too many names to count. Amidst all of these different cases that you have in the book, and some of these people where you got to talk to their family specifically and get more details, why did you go all the way back, 19th century, and to the opposite side of the continent to bring in one of my favorite, and I mean favorite people of all time? I love getting an excuse to read one of my favorite quotes of all time. If you scratch the white man too deep, you will find the same savage whose ancestry used to roam wild in Britain. The pitchfork, former governor of South Carolina, Ben Tillman. Why do you take us all the way to Hamburg, South Carolina, in the coroner's silence?
For several reasons. One, we are reaching and approaching our nation's centennial anniversary. And as my dear friend, Brother Eddie Glaude's recent book on this exact issue, every time, tragically, our nation is celebrating its independence, it has always come at the shadow of violence and white supremacy. And the massacre in Hamburg is one of those moments where black men who were part of the National Guard in South Carolina were celebrating independence. And white Confederates who had just a generation ago fought against the freedom of black Americans took offense to it. And so they started a confrontation that spilled over into the death of multiple black men who were doing nothing more than celebrating their independence in this nation. But Hamburg was an all-black town with a black sheriff and a black mayor and a black city council, and they held their own inquests. And they hired, or rather they convened, black citizens who were witnesses to the spectacle of the violence that happened in Hamburg. And they concluded that white nationalists from South Carolina and Georgia who arrived at the scene to perpetuate this violence against the National Guard were responsible. And they named white senators who would later come into power in the state. And the governor of South Carolina refused to do anything about it. And that refusal, I write, foreshadows where we go in the 20th century. And that foreshadowing involves everyday citizens, everyday black folks standing up against white supremacy and state violence, trying to use the levers of democratic power, multiracial democracy, to hold white folks and the state accountable for their violence. And government, because of white supremacy, can turn its back on the fundamental premises of our Constitution, universal rights, democracy, and say, we're not going to prosecute this. And I think that sort of sets the tone for what follows in the book, where I then later talk about the killing of Andres Guardado, who happened here in Los Angeles. And he, unfortunately, was the victim of police violence, was constitutionally innocent when he was shot to death, running away from law enforcement who shot him in the back. And the district attorney found that the police did nothing wrong and there were no charges brought against him. And I say the chances of finding police accountable for the death of Andres Guardado in the 21st century are the same chances that black folks in Hamburg, South Carolina had to finding the white nationalists who killed in cold blood the black military men who were part of the National Guard. And the question is why? And the answer is that our history hasn't fundamentally changed. We are committed still to thinking that this government belongs to white Americans and not anyone else. And we have to fight this every generation, this hold that white supremacy has on our democratic institutions. We are literally right now witnessing that as we are watching the spectacle of white supremacy take the country into yet another war, take the country into the erasure of the Civil Rights Voting Acts, women's rights to choose, and many other things that black folks fought hard for, not just themselves, but for this country to become a more fuller version of what American democracy actually could become. And the death of people at the hands of the state is at the center of this. And we have to remember the Hamburg massacre to fully understand what's going on.
Remember the red shirts indeed. Context of white supremacy. He mentioned the rolling back of abortion rights and what have you, reproductive access. Roe v. Wade. Does Henry Wade, does that name significant to you for any reason beyond the abortion case?
I will simply say that in this context, we need to understand the rolling back of women's right to choose has everything to do with white nationalists worried and concerned about them being replaced by black and brown Americans and black and brown folks. And so if you pass laws that make it illegal for white women to have abortions, what it does is it helps make people who are white feel more comfortable about maybe their numbers won't be dwindling in the ways that we predict. Maybe, in fact, more white people will have more white babies and this democracy can remain white. And that racist ideology, I think, is at the heart of why women's ability to have freedom over their reproductive rights is so powerful. And then the other side of it, of course, we hear every day in the media Black women who are dealing with health complications and want to choose abortion and cannot because of state laws and are being prosecuted because they are exercising their own right to choose in states that have actually erased those rights. And so it's all about controlling the reproductive lives of the people who make up this nation to consolidate power in ways that work against the freedom of Black and brown and marginalized political folks.
Wow. I was not expecting Dr. Keel to say that. Well, I guess that's why you asked the question. You never know what they're going to say. Much obliged, Dr. Keel. Wow. Got to take a moment to even recalibrate. I was so not prepared for that. It reminded me of some of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing's analysis in the ISIS papers in terms of her thoughts about white people's motivation for practicing the system of white supremacy. Racism is their concern about white genetic annihilation. We got too many dark people on the planet and it's not enough white people. Are you familiar with her work?
Oh, for sure. Yes, I am. Yes,
wow.
I am.
Wow.
I am. I just want to put a bow on this. I think that we need to understand that the institution of policing and throwing people into jails that target Black and brown folks is an extension of the logic of eugenics and white replacement anxieties. Here's how. If you pay attention to the sentencing time that Black folks are being given and Latinos are being given at the ages of 21, 22, 23. In fact, the federal government just through executive order of Donald Trump is actually reducing the minimum age to charge Black folks in DC as adults. Why does that matter? It matters because if you lock up Black and brown folks at the height of their reproductive primes and give them 20 years, 30 years, you know what that does? It prevents them from reproducing. And if you think about the staggering rates of Black and brown folks being thrown into our carceral institutions, that is not an accident. It is designed to rob them of the opportunity to reproduce and to have children. And if you can do that and remove their right to vote, like many states do, because once you're a felon, in certain states you can't vote, not only are you robbing them of their ability to have children, you're then robbing them of their ability to affect the democratic process. So you think about this in a long history of American racism, white supremacy, and eugenic logic. We are still living in an era where the government is trying to reproduce who lives for how long and whether or not with dignity. And at the heart of it is our institutions of policing and our death investigation system that is allowing this to happen without there being any consequence.
Wow. Context of white supremacy. I guess since we were in the context of South Carolina, spirit of George Stinney with us as well. Long history of, particularly for privileged Black males, get them young as possible so we can have them like exactly as brilliant analysis Dr. Keel, get them young so that when we having those super predator babies and all the rest of them, then we can have tabs on them from a young age, make sure we don't get no more generations of Huey Newton or Dr. Keel. We don't want them either. No more biolabs. This here broadcast is Context of White Supremacy. Anytime I read a book on racism and somehow, some way context comes up, oh man, I got to chapter 5, Perishing. Dr. Keel writes, a blood screening taken while in the hospital produced a presumptive positive result for cocaine, which meant it may or may not have been in his system. Maybe, we don't know, at the time of his death. Still, it appeared in his autopsy as a contributing factor, and as with Glenda's homicide, the report was narrated to create distance between the action of police and their effects on the body. Police restraint with the use of taser is not the same as saying police restrained and tased Mears. This linguistic ambiguity appears elsewhere in the technical sections of the autopsy. In order for the decedent to be restrained, police allegedly used pepper spray and allegedly used a taser. Allegedly. A few sentences later, however, when describing the actions of paramedics, we find he was given an injection of midazolam by the paramedics. The language here is clear, and the actions of the medical personnel on Michael Muir's body are obvious and plain. Just skipping one paragraph, the homicides of Glenda and Michael show us how law enforcement violence not only shortens lives, but also distorts the language we use to describe it, imposing an artificial distance between acts of brutality and their effect in the world and on bodies. There is a strange refuge in statements like, "The woman's body died rapidly," or "injury caused by firearm projecting beanbag missiles," rather than saying police fired a shotgun that killed her instantly. Transparency is not simply about access to death records. It also involves the language used to describe lethal police violence. This is one of my favorite parts of the book, but hey, Context of White Supremacy. Can you talk about this? I mean, this is, in my view, the hallmark of deception, the deliberate linguistic ambiguity that hides this racist police violence.
You know, if you go to the doctor, let's say, God forbid, you twist your knee or your ankle waking out of bed, which is something that I definitely have done. And I go to the doctor and I tell them what's going on. The doctor's making medical notes, listening. If you have a good doctor, they don't always do that, but sometimes they do. And then after, you get a summary. And in that summary, it'll say in very clear language, patient got out of bed, put the foot on the ground, felt a pain shot up their leg, came to me, I prescribed some sort of naproxen or some sort of anti-inflammatory. The language is clear. The sequence of events are linear. It's obvious. This happened, then this happened, and this was the consequence. If you were to take that expectation to reading an autopsy report, you would be sadly disappointed, because what you find in those death records is the lack of a linear narrative, the lack of clear statements about what police did to the bodies of the people in their custody. And when I began to sort of think about this after reading almost 1,000 autopsy records, it became clear to me it wasn't just that the death investigators were eroding the clarity that we needed by not actually saying in plain language. The cops killed a 40-year-old white disabled woman with a shotgun blast less than 3 feet away from her. Rather than saying that, there's all this ambiguity. What that does, it does a couple of things. It minimizes the violence of the police. It justifies their actions, which I think is fairly obvious. But the more nefarious thing is this. Our ability to see and register state violence on our bodies is a skill that has to be cultivated and maintained. And you can erode that skill. It's a perishable skill. If you write records that get the people used to being or used to reading language that doesn't make sense, that's unclear, that hides the truth of who did what to what. In other words, these records are actually conditioning us to not really ask the question, well, who did what? What did this police do to this person's body? And what worries me is that this erosion of our kind of capacity to see that the violence of police, we carry it in our bodies. If you erode that, especially in a moment where we're already dealing with assaults on our ability to think clearly without the aid of AI, to read clearly, because of the broken educational system, soon you're not going to have a public or people who are going to care about the distinction between violence and justice. And we are here at that moment in many ways. And so part of the argument that I make in the book and the reforms that need to be made is that we need death investigators to fill the silence with truth and to fill the silence with clear, explicit language about what police did to the people in their custody. Because when we don't have that, it lets police off the hook, but then it also diminishes our own ability to see other places in our society where the state is perpetuating violence right in front of us. Like, for example, when the government decides to not pay for SNAP benefits for people in Minneapolis because they're protesting against ICE, or when local governments refuse to provide social resources for housing that's affordable, or social resources to give people support for substance abuse or mental illness. These are acts of state violence, plain and simple, because they result in people getting sick and dying early. And we are losing the ability to see this really clearly. And the death record involving police, in my opinion, is one of the most obvious places where this is happening.
At the hands of persons unknown. Philip Dre's book, even just the cover, because it's a long history. That phrase alone, there's such a long history of that willful linguistic ambiguity, deception. What do you mean at the hands of persons unknown? Isn't that the mayor in that picture right there next to that? What do you mean unknown? It has, in my view, this practice has been refined. And in my view, I think it's so important because all of this linguistic ambiguity, it erodes context. And when you no longer have context, it is confusion. It is very difficult to grasp what is happening. What is going on? Why did this person die? Why did you can't get answers to any of those questions once context has been eroded. And racist, I really focus on this because so frequently, whether it's the carceral system or just white supremacy racism in general as a system, what does it mean to be classified as white? White people get very vague and ambiguous, non-linear. It gets so difficult. We can't even get a definition to some things. Like, it's just total willful, designed chaos to keep us completely confused and bamboozled. Minister Malcolm X, led astray, run amok. It's total design, but it is so important. And really, in my view, this practice of confusion and vague language, it has been refined over the years because I see it so frequently. What do you think, Dr. Keel?
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm going to add something else to the mix that I think is important for this conversation. It is without a doubt the emergence of police, with which we can date all the way back to the white paramilitary militias that were used to enforce the slave acts of the 1850s, to suppress the rebellions of Black folks who were enslaved all throughout the early part of the 19th century and even in the 18th century. Policing and carceral spaces were designed to target Black folks, Latino folks, and Asian people. No question, not a doubt. But one thing that we need to keep in mind is that carceral institutions and policing practices evolve and they become more efficient. They use Black and brown and Asian bodies to refine their cruelty and to refine what it means to be a threat to the state. And we haven't been paying attention to that refinement and evolution, partially because we're trying to signal the alarm: stop killing Black people, stop killing Latinos, stop killing racial minorities. We need to continue to say that, while also understanding we are living in a moment where whiteness does not even protect white people. And I can tell you this because I've looked at the data. And when I've looked at the number of people who have died during arrests in the United States, so these are people who are constitutionally innocent, haven't even been booked, haven't even gone to jail. Between 2000 and 2020, there were 32,100 people who died during arrests during that 20-year period. That's more than twice the number of people who are officially executed in American history, going back to 1608. Why does this matter? It matters for this conversation because when I look at the percentage of the victims, the largest single demographic there are white Americans. They made up 32% of the deaths, nearly 35% actually. Black folks, 22%, Latinos, 13%. So what does that mean? It means that this is that state violence and policing has evolved to not just target black and brown and racial minority bodies, but anyone who presents themselves as non-compliant, as mentally unwell, as struggling with substance abuse, as having PTSD from coming back to the war, or being just a good citizen like we saw with Alex Preddy and Renee Good. That means that white folks have to wake up and realize that the fight against the police state and rogue police institutions involves them too, because they are not safe. None of us are safe in this system that is unaccountable, and especially a system where the doctors and physicians who are supposed to tell us the truth are remaining silent.
Context of white supremacy. Now, I do want to give a bit of pushback to that point about not everyone being safe. I was looking at the data. This is chapter 4, collecting fragments, figure 4.3, the racial demographics of reported deaths by law enforcement during arrests or pursuits between 2000 and 2020. So kind of 2 decades in there. We got the Obama years in there too. And the number of victims classified as white, you have at 34.92%. Then the number of victims as black are 7,249. So wow, that's pretty high. And again, for folks keeping in mind, there are a lot more white people in this part of the world than black people. So in my view, it shouldn't even be that close. 11,210 to 7,249. Like, yikes, that is way, way overrepresentation of black people. But in between those two rows, unknown. Now, I can't even call this AI slop. This is white people slop. He talked about this is not regulated. Lots of discretion. Some precincts, some years they do a good job and report and give lots of great data. Some years, yeah. So we got this unknown. We don't know what that is. When I looked at that, and it's healthy too, the chunk of unknown is 8,279 victims. That's 25.79% of the victims. I said, wow, I bet you it's a considerable chunk of people who would probably be black that are in that unknown category where we didn't list it, we don't care, no one who will be missed. So I'm sure even if it's a tiny bit, I'm sure some of those are probably black people too. So that black category is probably underrepresented. Wow, this is so black male focused in terms of who is supposed to be incarcerated, who is supposed to be dying. It's been, white people know this. It reminded me of COVID-19, where white people were publicly saying, this is a black disease. I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm not going to social distance, not for those niggers getting a cold. It even, when you were just talking about the system where no one is safe, even white people die. We were talking about South Carolina. Ben Tillman is my dude. It reminded me of Dylann Storm Roof. In South Carolina, he got a hamburger from the Shelby County Police after he had killed 9 black worshipers in a black church, and one of those worshipers, a black elected official. He was safe in custody. In fact, he was so safe in custody, he got a hamburger. That is a very different level of treatment that is afforded to a white mass murderer that I think Elijah Thompson wouldn't get. Am I being logical? I don't think everybody is at a equal level of vulnerability in this system. Am I following logic?
No, you're right. I'm not arguing that equal vulnerability is a thing. That's not what I'm arguing. That's not my point. And I'll go back on a couple of things you said. One, the racial identity that I quote on that passage and in that figure, we have to remember police are the ones that are giving us the racial identity of the people they're killing. Cops aren't good at identifying people who are mixed race. Cops aren't good at identifying people who might have multiple different ancestries or who might have Arab ancestries within them. So that unknown category definitely got some black folks in there, but you probably got some Latinos in there. You definitely have mixed race people in there, and you definitely have people who have Middle Eastern ancestry. So the unknown category reflects the fact that police really don't know the racial identity of the people that they're killing. But let's put that to the side. We need to exist in a world where both things are true. And this is the difficult thing that I need your listeners and readers of this book to understand. We can at the same time say police institutions are targeting black and Latino men. And also police institutions, because of what they have learned, targeting black and Latino men, have become incredibly efficient at targeting anyone who has mental illness and are non-compliant, who have substance abuse and are a difficult person to deal with in jail or during arrest. And that if we are ever going to get out of this system, it cannot be black folks being unwilling to partner with marginalized white folks who are dealing with mental illness and substance abuse issue, who are being betrayed by their own government in the Rust Belt, in South Carolina, in Ohio, and Florida. We have to realize that the way white supremacy has worked is by undermining the very populist vote that they use to get into power, by choking off the social safety net and blaming black folks for it. It's a trick that's very, very old. White supremacist governments have been doing it since the Confederacy. We need forms of solidarity that cut across racial divisions. That's the only way this is going to change. Because if the people don't collect themselves to mount opposition, and I am in the streets here in Los Angeles, I'm in the streets in other parts of the country, and there are forms of coalition that cut across race, gender, and religious boundaries. It's not just black folks who are protesting against the police. It's white folks, it's Asian folks, it's Latinos, it's people with Muslim ancestry. I see the movements that are happening. It has to then trickle down how we think about state violence. If we're just stuck into thinking it's only black and Latino men, we are missing the other victims and also, more importantly, the potential allies of change and reform that we absolutely need to get us out of this mess.
Wow. Context. Thank you for your response, Dr. Keel. Again, we are speaking with the author, The Coroner's Silence, Death Records and the Hidden Victims of Police Violence. Pretty much brand new. Dr. Terence Keel. Didn't this just publish 2025? Is that true?
Came out at the very end of November. Still a new book.
That's new. That's new, Dr. Keel. That's new. Congratulations. That's new. Chapter 3. This is everything that you just said with us. My response is going to your work, Chapter 3, Society Lives in the Body. For example, in his book, Dying of Whiteness, the historian Jonathan Metzl, White Man, explains that white Americans, particularly in the Rust Belt and the South, with some of the highest rates of disease and lowest life expectancy, have stockpiled guns and blocked healthcare reform measures to prevent the advancements of blacks, Latinos, and immigrant groups. These actions have adversely impacted white people's own life choices driven by racial resentment and the desire to protect white privilege. Indifference to our own well-being and that of others is a deeply American way of seeing the world, shaping what many perceive when confronted with people who are sick, have substance abuse issues, carry mental issues, suffer chronic conditions, or die early. We often only see bad choices, poor genes, ignorance, not the legal, political, and economic decisions that create unhealthy people. When I got that section right there, I'm very familiar with Mr. Metzl And these white people in general, it's been all the repeals of Obamacare, and we don't want it, and NPR pulled some of these folks on, and you got white people saying, oh my, they're about to keel over and die on air, and they say, Dr. Keel, you know what? I might die tomorrow. I ain't supporting no Negro care. And then some of them, they did die tomorrow. They had some of the white elected officials, and they had the audacity to get on NPR in Louisiana. Pause the spirit of Huey P. Newton with us. They had some of the white elected officials in Louisiana, and they said, shh, I think our state might benefit from Obamacare, but I can't say it too loud. Shh. All of that conduct right there. How am I supposed to ally with people who they got shotgun and bought historic numbers of shotguns and said, oh no, we're not doing no Obamacare. How in the world are we going to do some sort of multiracial struggle when they've already said no? They said no to Obama. Man, that's about the best of the best of the best. If Obama's an ape and a Negro, I don't think we're going to make it with the multiracial struggle, Dr. Keel. Am I being ignorant?
No, you're not being ignorant. I think you're being informed by the history, the dark history that Philip Dre and so many others have taught us about. And your suspicions are real, legitimate, and genuine. But what I will say back is that we need to remember the kind of society and system that we actually deserve and we need to fight for, we will not see in our own lifetime, because the institutions of white supremacy, of racial capitalism, of political exploitation were not made in a single generation. They were made after multiple generations. We're dealing with a project that has been in formation for 250 years. That then means if we need to design something new, it's going to take at least equal the amount of time that it took to create these systems. So what that ultimately means is that the real beneficiaries of the type of social political revolution we've been talking about for the last year, some of which haven't even been born yet, and some of which will definitely be white folks and definitely not be black folks, right? And if we look at the polls right now, the polls that took place when Bernie Sanders ran for president, the polls that took place when Barack Obama was president, what that showed us is that the vast majority of American voters under the age of 35 years old are progressive and on the left. That includes white folks, right? So that means the audience for this type of fundamental rethinking of the state that we carry in our bodies, the policing institutions that are out of control, and the coroners that are failing us includes young people who aren't just black and brown, people who are white, people who are queer, people who are non-binary, people who maybe in a previous generation would have been our mortal enemies as you described them. I have great grandfathers and great uncles who have told me things just as dark and violent about what they had to endure in Louisiana or what they had to endure as military men. So I know those stories really carefully, but I also know the students that come into my classroom are the ones that are at the protests, white students, Asian students, Latino students, who see the world very differently and who understand what's at stake. So we need to acknowledge the pain in the past, but realize we can't get out of this in one generation, and we got to build for something better, and that has to be a collective effort. It's got to be.
I want to sit with that for a moment before I reply, just so that I don't forget. I was in Los Angeles at the end of 2024. I was able to get work done at UCLA on Jim Jones. That was a white fella who was at some of the multiracial protests. Get it together. I was at UCLA, and they have so much great information. And then about maybe 45 days after I departed, they had the 2025 wildfires. you talk about Kenneth Wayne Adcock and some of the inmates, folks who get locked up in California, and how they're forced to be in the wildfires. I guess gave me leeway to ask, were you impacted by the wildfires? I know UCLA, the campus is pretty close to where they had the evacuation zone and they canceled classes. Like, did that directly impact you in any way, Dr. Keel?
Oh, yeah, I'm going to respond to both those things you said. Yes, it had, and it continues to, because where my family and I live, we're not that far from the Palisades, and the chemical retardant that was dropped on the land in places all throughout Los Angeles, where we are, but also in Altadena, where many Black Americans lost their homes. That chemical retardant has cancer-causing chemicals and endocrine disrupting compounds, things that affect our hormones in it, that has seeped into the soil. And every time the heat and the temperature rises, the chemical elements of those compounds break open and return back into the air. And so literally the quality of the air that we've been breathing since the fires has been terrible because of the chemical retardants that we put and that we use to put the fire out. So yes, we are still dealing with the aftermath of it. And tragically, our chemists have told us we will be dealing with this for a long time in Los Angeles. And the point about Kenneth Wayne Adcock is that California and other states have been using jail and prison labor for a very long time, have been exploiting that labor. And that Kenneth Wayne Adcock was one of these people who was medically cleared to be a part of the fire camp program, which, by the way, kills inmates all the time. And he dies during an exercise to prepare to fight the fires. And these are very dangerous things that have to be done. And the question is, who was responsible for his death? The death record said that he had a bad heart and that's why he died. He died of natural causes. I argue, no, that wasn't it at all. It was the fact that he was medically cleared to be involved in a fire camp program when he shouldn't have been. So whoever cleared him medically should be held accountable for medical negligence. So it's about exploiting politically vulnerable people. And again, Kenneth Wayne Adcock wasn't Black or Latino. He was a white guy. He was a white guy who was in jail, who dies because of this corrupt system that exploits the political vulnerable. So those are the stories I think we have to bring to our minds when we're thinking about what kind of future we need and what kind of future we have to design. And we have to acknowledge there are lots of different victims. And those victims have wisdom if we have the ears to hear that wisdom. And that's the thing that I think is the most difficult for me in writing this book, is that we are losing the ability to hear what the dead have to tell us. Sometimes that's because we don't have the access to the dead because the way the states make these laws where you can't even get an autopsy. Sometimes that's because the death record tells us, oh, those people, they didn't die because of the police, they died because they had bad bodies. And sometimes we can't hear the dead because we've internalized certain ideas about who is the target of these systems. And so we don't hear all the white folks, all the poor people, all the unhoused folks, all the veterans, all the teenagers, all the non-binary folks who are also dying in the hands of the state.
Context of White Supremacy. Much obliged for sharing. I think it is so important. Woo, they even have a lawsuit filed about Black residents in Southern California, victims of the wildfires, that they were not given the same notification as people on the white side of town. Like, woo, total system. Thank you so much for sharing that. I double appreciate that, Dr. Keel. I see we had folks with a hand up. We'll nab their question really quick. I remember you were talking about the young white people and maybe them having a different experience and maybe some of them being allies to fight against racism, white supremacy. Dylann Storm Roof, I think it was about 2021. I was in Buffalo for the sentencing of Peyton Gendron. I think he also was about 19. I have not seen that much of a difference in behavior from the younger generation of individuals classified as white. Even in fact, I mean, I can look from that perspective, but I can harken back. I did mention Jim Jones, so we already got one on the board, but there were quite a few white people who said, oh yeah, I'm with, Dr. King. Hey, it's April 4. There were a lot of white people who said, I'm with Dr. King. I went to the march and I support what Dr. King has to say. Fewer for Malcolm X, but Same thing for the Black Panther Party and all of that. Yet and still, here we are. And now, lots of those names that I just mentioned, they have been DEI'd right out of the library and the classroom, so we can't even talk about them too much without getting in trouble. I just don't see the evidence for so-called young white people saying, yes, we are no longer in support of a system of white supremacy racism, and we're going to help do something about this problem.
Look, here's what I'll say to you. Depends on where you look. Depends on where you look. I think this is a larger ethical and, quite frankly, spiritual problem. And that is this. As much information there is available for us to believe in nihilism and pessimism about what we are and where we are going in the country, there is equally amount of information to tell us otherwise. For us to realize that people that we share this nation with are folks that are more similar to us than we might realize. This doesn't mean that the pain and the grievances that black folks, brown folks, people on the wrong side of this law, this state, this government don't have grievances. But we have to have the capacity to be able to hold multiple things together at one time. Because if we don't, then we will not learn and remember the lesson of people like W. Du Bois, who've been telling us for centuries, right? He wrote an entire book about Reconstruction. And what does he tell us in Reconstruction? Working white folks and recently emancipated black folks had an opportunity to turn their power collectively against the 1% plantation class that controlled the economy and the lives of people in America. And what did our government do? It used racial division to divide these different working class people to set the trajectory that we're currently on. You use racism to divide us, and if they're divided, they can't unite, and they can't unite, then the 1% can continue to rule the earth and draw us into these apocalyptic times that we're currently in. I firmly believe that racial division is a tool that is so easily used as a weapon against us. Doesn't mean that we can't ignore the past. It doesn't mean we can't ignore the violence of the past. It doesn't mean that black folks shouldn't be arguing for reparations. We should. Government owes that debt. But then we also need to be developing the capacity to see the allies that are in the rooms, that are on the subways, that are in the cities that pass us every single day. And if we can't do that, then we don't change anything. We can't get out of this mess. And we've been stuck in this trauma cycle as a nation in ways that don't work for us, right? That work against us. And Trump is giving us the playbook that goes all the way back to the Confederacy. You just turn the volume up on white fear, white flight, white replacement, and then you can do all kinds of different things. What if we actually undo that weapon and we show all of the ways in which this system is designed to keep white people poor and oppressed, just like black folks who are also struggling to pay bills and to buy groceries? That changes a lot of things. It's not so easy to weaponize whiteness against those folks. That's where we've got to put our energy. And if not, we're going to be stuck in this trauma cycle.
Context of white supremacy. Before I nab one of our callers who dialed in, this is in chapter 4 of the Coroner's Silence, collecting fragments. I guess even before I read this passage, I do want to say one slight difference. I do think I agree with Dr. Keel that this problem, replacing white supremacy with justice, I do think that that can and will happen. The only difference of opinion I have is that I think that can be accomplished without individuals classified as white. But the passage from chapter 4, you write, the National Violent Death Reporting System only releases summary data to the public, meaning the original information sent to them by police and public health agencies has been processed by a statistician, providing the best interpretation they can offer, hopefully. Because the system is based on voluntary reporting, like DCRA, it is not uncommon for police to request that the name of their department or the location of an in-custody death be withheld in the data making the information unusable. Listeners who have a good memory, remember we talked about that section of the data. It was figure 4.3. They had that big unknown. There you go, right there. Although I said I can't even call that AI slop. That's just white people slop. But in that passage, Dr. Keel, the portion where you say it is not uncommon for police to request that the name of their department or location be redacted, basically. I said, oh, that is and I'm not an English scholar by any means. There's one scholar here, Dr. Keel. But from my meager understanding, that is a double negative. And I thought it would be, I think they encourage you to not use double negatives. They say try to be a bit more forceful. Would it be accurate, even grammatically correct? Why not just say police are commonly and forcefully demanding to be invisible to avoid accountability?
Sure. Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. I think that the point there is to get at something else that we haven't quite talked about. And that is, we have been socialized to believe that police are what keep us safe. And it's not just white folks who believe that. I've been talking to people all around the country. I've been talking to black folks all around the country in different ages and demographics. And they have told me, well, we need police. Police do keep us safe, especially from young people, sometimes even black folks who are robbing us in Chicago, who are breaking into our homes, so forth and so on. Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because the more that we believe police are what make us safe, the more power law enforcement have. The more power they have, the greater their discretion to do things like be anonymous, redact records, refuse to report the names of the people that they kill and disremember, right? So if we want to get out of this, we have to imagine other forms of safety and security that don't involve empowering police by giving them more money and more control over our society. And so that, to me, means, well, we need to be thinking about safety in terms of employment, safety of one's mind. Do you have mental health services in your community to go to? Do you have health care that you can get access to that isn't going to break the bank and make you choose difficult choices between, do I got to buy groceries or do I buy medication? Housing are things that keep us safe. These are basic material needs that when those are unmet, it leaves everyone vulnerable. And when they are met, that is, the social safety net is robust and it's taking care of all of us. I believe, and many others believe, that that loosens our grip on thinking that cops and jails make us safe. Because that was true. LA would be the safest place on the planet. It's got the largest jail system in the country. In any given day, around 12,000 people are contained within Los Angeles County jails. That's like 4 high schools worth of people. It's got the largest police force in the country. If that kept us safe, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and I'd be telling you that Los Angeles is one of the safest places in the country and the police hardly ever kill people. But that isn't true, right? So we've got to change what we think safety is, because those beliefs keep us putting money in the pockets of law enforcement that then they use to exercise more control and more power over all of us.
Context of White Supremacy. I will nab Octavius in New York. Did you have a question for author, scholar, Dr. Terence Keel? You should be with us, Octavius in New York. Did you have a question, sir?
Yes. Greetings, Gus. Greetings, callers and listeners. And thank you for being here with us tonight, Dr. Keel. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, if you see movement happening, and within New York City now, there's obviously a lot of movement based on the new mayor. I noticed that there are different divisions that are working to push policies in healthcare, policing, and environmental issues. But I've been paying attention to these different groups and different divisions, and they don't seem to be focusing on race as one of the corner issues in all those segments, because in every one of these segments, healthcare, policing, environmental issues, and I can go on, housing as well, and labor, et cetera, don't seem to be focusing on housing at all. Non-white people at all, specifically black people. They kind of here and there have it, but it's not showing up. Do you think that if they do focus in on that, especially in a place like New York, it can really cause movement and really cause traction, as opposed to focusing on what it seems like to be mainly white transplants, as they say, white people who are from like Nebraska or Omaha or whatever? Hope you're following my question, but that's one of the things I'm kind of concerned about. What do you think in regards to that?
Great question. Thank you for that. I actually have a bit of a different read if we're talking about New York and Mamdani's team. What I have noticed in the administration he's put together, which includes people like Alex Vitalia, who wrote the book, The End of Policing, and other people who are certainly progressive, the team and Mamdani's team has pivoted towards putting investments into alternatives to policing and incarceration. Care First programs that are designed to actually amplify work that's going on in New York, where communities are doing certain types of reform that are part of the people's justice movement, right? So there is the Red Hook Community Justice Center in Brooklyn, for example, which is part of a restorative justice movement that's led by Black folks who are coming together to resolve offenses beyond the control of police and law enforcement. This was happening before Mamdani took over, right? So these are Black folks on the ground who are leading these alternative community-driven forces. And so if you are aware these things are happening on the ground, and then you hear policies that are aligning with this, well, let's divert resources away from police and put them in the hands of community organizations that are thinking about housing, that are thinking about justice, that are thinking about shelter, then it changes what's going on. I think there's a strategic political strategy to push policies that actually enhance work that Black social justice organizations on the ground are doing in an environment where we got a president that is doing an all outright assault against anything that tries to target Black and brown folks. Now, I don't want to be too generous, because politicians are politicians and they will do difficult, complicated things. And I think that the tenure of Mamdani will be judged after he completes his first term. So we've got to watch and see how he moves. But I can tell you that the mayor of Chicago is also doing some pretty powerful things. Black mayor of Chicago, who's been paying attention to community first, justice driven movements where it's not about dumping money into police. It's about building up policies that are actually helping Black communities build on the work they've already been doing, and dumping what he calls Care First wraparound services that help all folks in Chicago. And you don't necessarily need to be explicit about what racial group is doing is going to benefit from that if you're paying attention to the work that's on the ground that these elected officials are now trying to amplify. So I think it's American politics is a complicated mess of signaling and code talking that I think we have to pay attention to. And then we have to later judge the tenure of these elected officials on whether or not they portray or enhance the movement of Black folks.
Understood. Thank you for that. Gus, I have one more question in regards to education. Is that, do you have time for that, or do you have something else?
Let's hear it.
Yeah, Dr. Keel, thank you, Gus. Dr. Keel, in regards to education, how do you see that as a primary force within institutions all around the states? Because as of right now, and the education and the Department of Education itself is being demolished. So if that's happening at the same time, how are we going to inform most people in regards to the systems that are coming in place to obviously subjugate people, especially non-white people, what the educational system already was poor before? So I was just curious what you think would be some solutions as far as keeping that going, especially in Black and brown communities, non-white communities.
Excellent question. You know, we can read media headlines and we hear about the dismantling of the Department of Education, which is a tragedy, which is a problem, because the Department of Education, for listeners, it sets minimum guidelines around curriculum and education from elementary all the way through secondary education, right? So it's important. You need federal guidelines. So if the government is dismantling that, you know what we need now? We need states and counties and cities to step up and to do the work that they had been doing. And this is where paying attention to people down ballot. Who are you voting for superintendent of education? Who are you voting for to be on the education council? Pay attention to their politics and their values around Black and brown folks, because that is going to matter on who's going to be in power and who's going to be in control, and whether or not they are going to continue investing in Black and brown folks, changing education systems that are broken that help contribute to the prison pipeline, or if they're going to move in a conservative direction, right? So I always think of when the feds pull away, we need to pay more attention to what's going on in local politics, right? Democracy is a participatory sport. Can't be on the sidelines. You got to be engaged. So we got to know who are these elected officials on these councils, because they're the ones that are going to have a huge control over what happens with the textbooks and the school curriculums and what we are expecting our leaders to do when setting standards, or maybe even enhancing standards, even though the federal government is betraying them.
Well, thank you for that. I think that answered my question. Thank you guys for the extra question, and I'll mute my line.
Thank you.
Much obliged, Octavius in New York. See if I can sneak in one quick question, and then we'll get retired firefighter in Florida. You were talking, this is in chapter 4, Dr. Keel, the collecting fragments. You write, modern policing in America was effectively given the task of keeping the nation safe while rapidly growing beyond the control of the federal government, which during the 1960s was making strides to increase the reach and power of a pluralist democracy. The disconnect between police working to maintain power over local communities and the federal government moving towards social equality helps explain why systems designed to collect data about in-custody death are inadequate. Important section, but I paused just for a moment, especially with the context being the 1960s. I said the federal government was making strides to increase the reach and power of a pluralist democracy. I said, Now, I'm even thinking in the context of COINTELPRO, certainly, which you allude to in the work, but April 4 was just Saturday. I said, man, we're still trying to get all those records about their performance in the assassination of Dr. King, and even importantly for this work about the medical coroners, death records and death investigators, the coroners reports. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment was rolling throughout the 1960s, not even exposed until the 70s, and it's not that it was stopped by the federal government because they had a change of heart or because they were making strides towards being just, doing the correct thing. It was stopped because it was going to be exposed, and so we got to stop doing this. That's a federal government program, which in Tuskegee syphilis experiment was talked about a lot during COVID-19, but that's a federal government program. Those are massive events happening during this time period that, to me, do not signal that the federal government, they were making strides towards justice, not practicing racism. Am I following logic, evidence?
I think that we need to, I appreciate the question. I think we have to understand what it means when the federal government introduces legal standards. So the Civil Rights Voting Act of 1957, which actually predates the Civil Rights Voting Acts of the 1960s, gives federal prosecutors more power to identify and go after white vigilantes and white supremacists who are intimidating black folks who are trying to vote. You need those federal guidelines to empower people to do the kinds of things that then later in the civil rights movement, when you are sending Ella Baker and many other folks down there to get votes for black folks together, right? Sending black folks in the parts of the South that are deeply racially segregated. They got district attorneys behind them to prosecute cases when we are identifying racism. But we got to understand, laws don't change culture, not overnight. And again, back to my point a little bit earlier, we're dealing with a system that was carefully crafted over multiple centuries. One voting act is not going to undo that. One voting act is not going to undo embedded cultural values and racism, right? So we have to see a broader timeline, right? We have to understand that just because we get the voting acts of the 50s and the 60s, it doesn't mean overnight that this white supremacist colonialist project is just going to go away. It requires steadfast commitment to both protect these laws and continue to influence the culture and how we think about black folks, Latinos, and marginalized folks. So it's important that we have a kind of patience and we have a kind of hope for the future, because again, I firmly believe this, reading Du Bois, reading Ella Baker, reading Frederick Douglass, when you read these folks, their timeline for change isn't just in their generation. They even say as much. They understand this is a project that we have to be committed to over time, because new laws don't necessarily change hearts, but they do give us the basic conditions to actually use the state to protect the people, right? Because right now, with cops and medical examiners, the state is being used against the people. And this is the change that needs to happen now.
Context of white supremacy. I had to double check just because, hey, I wasn't sure. Frederick Douglass passed away 1895. I think just in terms of white people changing their conduct, 131 years. It's been a number of generations. They look pretty steadfast. This is in chapter, real quick before I get to retired firefighters question. You write wait a minute, did they move my footnote? Got moved. I'll double check with retired firefighter, make sure I got my footnote correct. Retired firefighter, did you have a question for Dr. Keel? You should be with us.
Greetings, everyone. Greetings to the guests. My question is to the guests. Being that white people are a tiny minority on the planet, and I think that you answered the question or question that Gus gives to everybody about racism, white supremacy. I don't know whether or not you agreed or not that white people are dedicated to this problem. Do you think that non-white people who are victims of this problem can reach the point to being dedicated to solving this problem and therefore solving the problem of racism, white supremacy in a record time?
I do believe it because I've watched it. I've watched Helen Jones, black mother of John Horton III, who was beaten to death inside of Men's Central Jail before his 22nd birthday. And Helen could have scorched the earth, could have been a black anarchist, and no one would have blamed her. But that's not what she decided to do. She became the face of a movement in Los Angeles and now the country, and if not the world, fighting to ensure that what happened to her black son never happens to anyone else again. And not just the black folks, but the white folks, to Latinos, to Asians. Like, we need to be connected to the people who are the face of the movement, because if when you hear them, their vision is far more capacious and pluralist than we might imagine, because they understand that this is a systemic collective problem, right? That implicates lots of different folks. So yes, I do believe that black folks do and can have the capacity, but I also know we need to heal ourselves, because if we can't heal from the trauma of the past, then we are not going to be the people that we need to shoulder the burden of designing better institutions. Because what will happen is we will just reproduce that trauma into those institutions of care and change that we actually need. And the we includes all of us, right? So I'm seeing it every day. I'm seeing the miracle of people who have been the direct victims of state violence, choosing to fight for a pluralist democracy, right? And in ways that are just so inspiring, that make me wake up and say to myself, look, sometimes it's dark and I grapple with my own feelings of nihilism. But then I say to myself, if Helen Jones or Khadijah Shabazz or Palani Lucas or Terry Lovett can wake up after having lost their sons to police violence and say, I don't want a single other family in this country to ever endure what I had to endure, that means that I can wake up and do this fight and be involved in this. So we need to be paying attention and plugged into the folks who are doing the fight and doing the heavy lifting and taking cues from them, right? And when we do that, we can find spaces of hope for a better future than we're currently dealing with. I fundamentally believe that.
Okay. I know that you would like to have white people contributing towards solving this problem. But can you tell us any group of white people who have significantly made a real difference into solving the problem of racism, white supremacy?
I was just protesting with them on Monday in front of the Department of Justice in downtown Los Angeles. It was a multiracial coalition of white folks, Asian folks, Muslim people, people who have Latino ancestry. This is what I'm saying. Like, we need to educate ourselves about who are the face of these movements of prison abolition, right? Who are the faces of these movements of trying to hold police and county officials accountable, right? It's white folks in those groups. It's not just black folks. And quite frankly, if I'm being entirely honest, there's a lot of black Americans who won't admit. Some of them don't want to give up on law enforcement and police. They've told me this. Hey, we need cops because I don't like my house being broken into by young black men. And the question I always say, why do you think they're breaking into your house? It's because local governments have already failed them. They're not giving them jobs. They're not giving them dignity. They're not giving them power. They're not giving them opportunities because they've failed them, right? So calling the police isn't going to do anything but sentence them to life of prison or kill them. That's not a solution. That's not progress. That's doing the work of white supremacy for white supremacy, right? So until we examine our own commitments to state violence, until we trouble our own, I think, simplistic virtue. Yes, we are victims of the system, but here's the real dark part of being a victim of the system. That stuff's in you too. State violence is in us too. And until we are honest about that, we're not going to be able to heal enough to create the institutions we really need and to see the allies that are already in the trenches that don't look like us, who know the system's got to go. Because it's not just about black folks or white folks. It's about a collective future that we deserve as people in this country. Fundamentally believe that. So I challenge you. Find out who in your local organizations, wherever you are living, go find those organizations who are fighting for prison abolition, police abolition, and care services. And when you look at those coalitions who are involved, you are going to be surprised at how multiracial and multi-religious they are in ways that I think we need to be dialed into. Again, democracy is not it's a participatory sport. If you're not in the trenches, you're not part of the solution, and we got to get there. That's the only way. Otherwise, we buy into these myths that don't actually help us see the solutions that we need.
Much obliged, retired firefighter in Florida. Hopefully that got your question answered, sir. We won't take up all of Dr. Keel's evening, but maybe my last three questions before we can wrap up. Thank you so much for your patience and letting us dig into the coroner's silence. Some of our listeners.
Are we black proud?
Even got our Jim Jones sound clip in. Incidentally, I will say for Jim Jones, he has a established record multiracial in fact, even multi-faith protests, struggles in Los Angeles and Southern California, Oakland, San Francisco, not Southern California, Bay Area, California. Jim Jones, well established, but that did not end well eventually. Any hoodles. In the coroner's silence in chapter 3, you write specifically, the data bears this out. Since the 1980s, American life expectancy has steadily fallen when compared to other nations. In 1933, life expectancy in the United States ranked 8th behind the Netherlands, Norway, Australia, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, and Canada. By 1950, life expectancy in the U.S. fell behind 11 other nations, with Americans living on average 68 years. And you go on to talk about how things have gotten worse with regards to health, and particularly for black people. But when I looked at some of these other countries that are doing better, Netherlands, Norway, Australia, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, Canada, the thing that stood out about these other so-called countries, these are highly white areas, meaning they do not have tons and tons and tons, especially tons of black people in these regions. And it reminded me, we just had Dr. Paul Thomas as a guest on our program from Norway, and he talked about that area specifically with the increase in non-white immigrants over the last quarter century. The spirit of Ben Tillman is in Norway. And it has been, oh my goodness, we've got these dark people coming in and they're going to mooch off our good health care and benefits. And oh no, we don't want same sort of commentary that we're having here. So I guess just in my view, at least, that seems to speak to a more global reach of what it means to be white. And even, is there going to be hope for white allies, and that maybe we can see a different way about policing and healthcare and how we view one another? What do you think, Dr. Keel?
Again, this goes to the things that we've been talking about all evening, actually, as we wrap up. You need to understand that the American Medical Association, the American Association of Hospitals have fought against universal health care because states who are in the former Confederacy and white supremacists who are in political office understand that when and if the government does this, universal health care raises the lot of everybody. Right? Because that's how it works. You can't just have healthcare for one group. You got to have it for everyone in the state or in the county or in the nation. And so by fighting against health of black folks, it has come at the expense of white folks who live sometimes in the same city, in the same projects, and in the same places that are riddled by environmental racism, that are riddled by poor drinking water, that are riddled by poor air, that are living in the same environments where the tech billionaires are building data systems for AI, and they are strangling black, brown, and poor people who live in those areas, right? And so until, again, this gets back to the core argument of the book, we can't see state violence when it's staring us in the face because we have all these other ideologies that take our imagination to other places. But if we could see with moral clarity, we can understand wealth is health. And if you have it, and you're not dealing with an environment where half of your body is in the grave, if you have the power of health, that means you're more inclined to get involved in the messy work of doing democracy and creating the kinds of institutions we need for the future, right? So part of the problem is seeing that we need these institutions, these wraparound care services, because all of us want to live in cities where we don't see unhoused people. All of us want to live in cities where if someone is dealing with a healthcare crisis, they can get the treatment and care they need rather than police coming around to disappear them or kill them, right? I want to live in that world. So how do we get there? We got to design the institutions that are offering care and support for everyone who belongs to this nation that we call the United States. If we adopt this ideology of, well, there are people who are on the inside or on the outside, then it doesn't make us any different than nation states that explicitly discriminate against people on the basis of their race or their religion or their beliefs. We see where that story goes. We know what that is like. We're watching it right now with the genocide in Gaza. We're watching it right now with genocides in other parts of the world. So either we're going to have a real democracy where people are empowered, it's multiracial, or we're not. And it's just that simple. And we've already done the other thing. Democracy just for whites and the scraps for everyone else. It doesn't work. It's a dead end. So the question is, how do we get there? And I think having universal health care, I even think having basic universal income are things that everyday folks need in this country just to live with dignity and purpose.
At least from what I've seen, I just want to be clear, at least my view at this point, because I've seen many generations of white people allegedly marching with black people or saying that they're marching against racism. That in and of itself does not make me think that that is a white person who is not racist or even a white person who is sincere about ending this problem. But that notwithstanding, I do think this problem can be solved. I just don't think white people's help will be required to get it done. But that's one that we can all just make an evaluation and pay attention to. I will say we spoke with Dr. Berkeley France, epidemiologist, and she said, according to her research, white people, as they become aware, there could be a problem with our population numbers globally, and maybe they're more non-white people, that they become more defensive about protecting white supremacy, racism, and their status as white people. So that's one we can evaluate and see if that's true or not as we proceed. Are there going to be any white people, significant number of them, to break away? Even the minimum, I would say, I think is true. Right now, the white people who allege that they are not racist, and they could be lying, but at least they say they're not racist, they are way less powerful than the white people who are racist. That's got to be self-evident, because we would have solved this problem already.
I agree with that. I'll push back on one point, or a few points. One is this. Baby boomers, they've been socialized in a way that I don't know if I have a lot of optimism about how they think about things. I don't. And I can tell you, looking at history in America, name a single movement in this country's history where the coalition behind that movement all thought the same. Not even the civil rights era movement had coalitions where every single person was united on every issue. That's not how movement works. Movement works by bringing people together who have different beliefs and different ideologies, and they find that common core between them. And they realize, this is a lever of power, whether it's legal change or economic change, that if we pull that lever, it creates the thing that we all collectively want. And even if you look at the history of the civil rights era, there was tremendous division among black folks within the civil rights movement. Remember, when King was marching, he wasn't popular, not even among black folks. There were many black Americans who were not willing to go and do the bus boycotts, who were not willing to sit in the lunch countertops. We have to remember that. Black folks weren't always on the right side of history, right? And there were white folks and Jewish folks who sacrificed and who were part of the movement. There were Asians who were part of the movement. There were Latinos who were part of the movement, who all had their own beliefs and ideologies. It doesn't require us to think the same. All it requires us to do is to see the common places where we share similar types of hope and possibility for the future. So that's what I would say. And I think the battle is about the children who haven't been born yet. Because I don't think a single baby on this planet is born racist. They are educated to be racist. And so what does that mean? We need to be developing ideas and concepts and books that help white folks or people who aspire to whiteness to see the trickery and the deception behind the ideology that just because you have light skin, you are somehow intellectually, morally superior. It's a lie. Children are socialized to believe that. So we have an obligation. I have an obligation as an educator and a writer and a thinker to black folks, but also to anyone else who is being programmed and socialized to believe that they are better based on what they look like and the color of their skin. That's got to end. And I have an obligation to sort of help educate folks for the kind of future we all deserve.
If I can get my one pronoun question in, Dr. Keel, you said just a few moments ago, you said we are not able to see state violence, police violence, and it's in your text a number of times, the word we. Right at the very beginning, this is chapter 1, you write, rarely do we ask if the rules police enforce on our behalf are just and fair. Do they make us safe, that word again, and healthy? Do law enforcement and jail solve the root causes of crime and threats to the common good? Unfortunately, the space between law and order has become so thin in the minds of lawmakers that there is hardly any room for collective discussion about which rules are failing us, which work, and what new solutions we might create to establish safety and accountability within our communities. The problem is not merely about the failure of state institutions. We are also to blame. I said, wow, that, and the pronoun we, it's throughout the text. And I normally don't discuss white supremacy, racism using the term we, much less that we take collective failure. I even drift back. I was John Horton, Devontae Hart. I was thinking, are they included in the we? Do they bear some responsibility for the coroner's silence in all of this, Dr. Hart?
You know, there is a tradition in Black thought that I'm very influenced by, and it includes W. Du Bois, and it certainly includes James Baldwin, who have taught me many things, but one of which is that using the pronoun we is the only way to talk about and create space for our collective problems. James Baldwin was very skillful at using the pronoun we. And if you read his Notes of a Native Son, in particular, this collection of essays from the mid-1950s, he's very clear that this nation has internalized, Black folks included, the very violence that we are struggling against. So these simple divisions between Black and white, good and evil, the right side and wrong side of history don't work. They're not a basis through which we can develop change. They are not. We have to see our collective involvement in this. And the kinds of examples that I would tell you is that just do the work. How many Black law enforcement officers have beaten Black folks to death? There are plenty, if you look for it. See what I'm saying? How many Latino police officers who were involved in beating Black and Latinos people to death? They're there if you look for it. The people that beat John Horton III to death belong to a deputy gang, that is a gang group that involved police and law enforcement, that is multiracial. That's not just white folks, it's Latinos and Blacks who are also a part of that system, right? So it's a difficult, uncomfortable place to be when you see that the so-called face of the violence looks like you, but we've got to have the courage to see it, because if we don't, then how can we actually name the problem and create the tools that we need to solve that problem? So I'm a firm believer. The pronoun we matters because this is a collective problem. We're not going to get out of this in our own sort of silos. We have to have the capacity to see that we are collectively part of both the problem and the solution. There's no space of purity in this mess. There isn't. We are fallen creatures, and we also have the virtue of change. We've got to see both.
Oh, okay. Much obliged for your response, Dr. Keel. That I will say, the Black officers beating other Black people, I think Mr. Nichols in Tennessee, that did get a lot of publicity. I think that might have been a case where it was all Black officers who participated in the aggressive arrest and killing of Mr. Nichols in Tennessee. I think that was last year, if my memory serves.
Irene Nichols. Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But that's not really remarkable. Like you would have caught my attention, Dr. Keel, if you had said, hey man, there are tons of examples of Black people, Black officers smacking up white people. Black officers went and arrested Dylann Storm Roof, and he didn't get no hamburger. They smacked him around. So what you doing treating them Black brothers and sisters like that? Like, then you would have got my attention. But I mean, duh, like if you're going to be a Black, James Baldwin even said that. He said, man, if you call a police officer, you should hope a Black officer doesn't show up who has to prove that, oh, no, I'm with you, boss. I'm not with these niggers. Like, let me show you. I'm going to beat them down worse than you. Ha! So that's to be expected in the system of white supremacy. Just my view is not about purity. My view is basically from a court of law. You have plaintiffs and defendants. It is not an all we're all not the victims. The defendant and the perpetrator don't come sit on the same side of the courtroom. Hey, individuals classified as white have a different level of accountability. I do not view them the same. I do not view that as we when discussing racism and who is to blame, but that victims guaranteed qualified. Do you have a definition for the term racism, Dr. Keel?
So yes, I do. But to your point, where does that get you? Because surely I agree with you. Black folks were not the architects of white supremacy. They were not the architects of chattel slavery. They were not the architects of the plantation economy. They were not the architects of the Industrial Revolution that enslaved not just black folks, but all working people, right? So of course, obviously, there's a measure of responsibility that white folks have that does vary from black folks. But I don't know where that gets us other than where we already are, which is to say, again, we have been socialized not to see the violence of the state that we carry in our bodies, that we carry in our psyches, and we carry in our vision of the world. And when Martin Luther King said you can't solve racial segregation in America without solving white supremacy and American imperialism on abroad, what do you think he was talking about? He was talking about black and brown GIs murdering people in Vietnam. He was talking about the use of the American military industrial complex to spread this system of violence. And the people who were the perpetrators of that violence were, of course, black folks, military men, people who were forced to enlist into the military. And what happened to the king when he said this? He got half of his face blown off when he began to see it. This larger sort of empire vision connects domestic racism and fascism to global racism and fascism. So you see the point that I'm making here is that we need to understand when you live in a violent, lethal nation, no one is spared. Everyone carries that violence and lethality within them. So it's besides the point of who is responsible for the fire in the building. We have to acknowledge this building's on fire. And quite literally in our moment where we are watching climate chaos, we are watching global temperatures rise, we are watching police become unaccountable, we are watching the erosion of democracy. I don't know where it gets us if we are stuck in debates about who is culpable. I think we need to be able to understand, like Helen Jones, like Khadijah Shabazz, like Stanley Wilson Jr.'s mother. They are in the fight for everyone. That's where I get my hope and inspiration from. They're not caught in these arguments about accountability and responsibility in that sense because they're too busy focused on the institutions that we inherit that reproduce violence, regardless of who's in those institutions. That's where our focus needs to be.
Did you slip your definition of racism in there and I just missed it, Dr. Keel? Or
racism is a very, very clear, simple sort of belief that the world is designed in such a way that individuals are descendants of ancestors with unique traits, dispositions, and capabilities. And at the very top of that system are white Europeans who are believed to be the most intelligent, superior, and everyone else falls down below. That is the definition of racism that I teach in my classes that my first book explored. And in that system, it perpetuates itself by getting everyone to adopt this idea that your skin color or your ancestry predicts and tells us something about who you are, how long you're going to live, and how valuable you are. That's racism in a nutshell. And it's embedded into our institutions. It's embedded into our legal systems. It's embedded into policing and economics and law enforcement and certainly our education system. So if it's woven into those institutions and then babies are socialized within those institutions, guess what they become? Racist. And it doesn't matter what they look like. They are shaped by the society around them. Again, we carry society in our bodies, which means in our psyches, which means in our hearts, which means in our imaginations. The only way we get out of this is by focusing on these institutions and how they've been designed to create alternative institutions that give us freedom, justice, care, and accountability.
Last one before we let you go, Dr. Keel. Thank you. Always appreciate getting people's definition of racism. You talking is such an important point. I almost forgot. Thank goodness. The great Kobe Bryant, spirit of Kobe with us as well. You made a just massively important point about the presence of enforcement officials or sheriff's officers. Sometimes, frequently, I was going to say sometimes, but retract, be accurate, frequently. They are present for the autopsy. I didn't even know that until I had read your book in terms of conflict of interest and all the rest of it. But, woo, Mamba moment. We are talking Los Angeles, the very sheriff's department that he is talking about, blood of John Horton on their hands and everything. This is the same with the executioners, the prison gang that he mentioned. This is the same department. The great Kobe Bryant passed away right before COVID kicked off in 2020. They go and get crash scene photos. They go to the bar. Check this out. Check it. You see that? Oh, look at that. Look at that. Oh, they just had, or not just, it was a couple years back, but they had big $30 million lawsuit where his white wife, widow, Vanessa Bryant, where she got, I think, like $15 million settlement for all of this, and they came out in court. But I mean, as grotesque as you can imagine. I compared it to swapping lynching photographs. That is the first thing that came to my mind when I saw this for the first time, because I had no idea. But can you talk about, I mean, just a point to end on, the officers can be present for these autopsies, and how does that impact the report that gets produced?
That happens in states all around the country to return us back to the beginning, because we have empowered police in such a way that they frankly have the freedom to do almost anything that they want. Police are the only government agents on American soil that can kill your life lawfully without consequences. And imagine what happens when you give an agency like that billions of dollars to buy military-grade weapons, to kill someone in their custody, and then send an official from that very department to be in the room when the medical examiner is trying to get at the objective truth. That truth can't be objective, can it, if the police are in the room during the autopsy? So again, this complicates many things. It complicates the idea that that medical examiners and scientists are only interested in the objective truth. It complicates the very idea that government works on behalf of the people. Because if that were true, you would not have law enforcement in the room during the autopsy. You would maybe have a civilian. You would have a community member. You would have someone who's unrelated to law enforcement to make sure that the investigation is done. But that doesn't happen because we have too much power given to police to determine their jurisdiction. So again, how are we going to reel this all in? You got to focus on the institutions that were designed to perpetuate white supremacy, that have evolved into the form of fascism we are currently dealing with. How else do we get to this point other than the evolution of institutions that perpetuate violence and that now have become so efficient at it that we're all victims of it, potentially? I like to think of it as we are all one bad mental health day away from finding ourselves in the grips of police and potentially losing our lives. And that worries me. And it worries me because we continue to live in a democracy, of what's left of a democracy, without a social safety net. So no mental health support, too many controlled substance issues, too many opioid epidemics and alcohol use, because people are supplementing themselves because they don't have governments that care about them and are unwilling to give themselves health care, and unwilling to give the regular people the institutions of care they actually deserve and need. So if there's any message in the book, it's all this violence and death and disappearing of people can happen in a system that fundamentally does not believe that Americans deserve dignity and care. That has to change.
I'm so sad to have to say his name again, very respectfully. I think it can be said Dylann Storm Roof had a pretty bad day, ended up in enforcement officers' clutches, and nothing bad happened. In fact, he got a sandwich.
Yeah, sure. He did. He absolutely did. But for every Dylann Roof, there's countless of numbers of white folks who die on the scene, who end up on the same examination tables next to black folks and Latinos and Arab people and old people and disabled people. So again, we have to have the capacity to hold both things simultaneously. yes, white supremacy is real. And yes, also we work under a government, or we're surviving under a government institution where state-sanctioned violence and fascism can end anyone's lives. It's not a binary system. Got to have the capacity to see both.
The book, The Coroners, Silence. We've been chatting it up with the founder of the UCLA Lab for BioCritical Studies. Again, the book just came out November. To me, that is brand new. I mean, we're not even, I don't even think it's been 6 months yet. So brand new book. Go out, nab it at the store. You can get it online. They have all the different, even have the audio book. So whichever version of it that you need, get your copy. The Coroners, Silence. Black books, written by a black author. Black books, black books. Thank you so much for being generous with your money. He could have been watching the championship game or working on a new book or enjoying Southern California weather. Anything but chatting it up with us. Thank you for your time and energy. Dr. Keel, I learned a ton, sir.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate your time. Let's do this again.
For sure, for sure. Take care of your lungs. Be safe down there in Southern California. I will definitely be looking for your future scholarship, sir.
Thank you very much.
Be well. Have a great evening.
You too.
Context of White Supremacy. Again, our guest, Dr. Terence Keel, The Coroner's Silence, Death Records, and the Hidden Victims of Police Violence. UCLA. Again, I was just there. I don't think I knew about his research at the time that I was there. That was like into 2024. And really, I was Jonestown focused. So I didn't really have time and, whole lot to do. Any film festival, Jonestown, very focused. But man, that was such an experience. Was able to learn so much, got so much information at UCLA. Wow, they have so much information. If you ever get time to go to LA, like if you do your beach, or if you're going to hang out with the family, or whatever you're going to do in LA, see if you can get like one afternoon and you can go to UCLA, do some research. Maybe Dr. Keel might be there. You can tell him, hey, heard you on the cows, brother, right on all that. But go hang out at UCLA, and they have events and such going on. It's open to the public. Like, go do some research. Might learn something constructive. We'll take a quick break. Be right back. Context of White Supremacy. Hang tight.
Got another term on there, VGQ. What does that mean? Victims Guaranteed Qualification. Now, that keeps you from getting in arguments with other black people, particularly on television, which I get sick of that. Black people shouting. We get into our ghetto thing once we get on television and get wound up. And we start all yelling at once. And the racists sit there smugly and just look. They watch the tennis match, so to speak. Right. And black people are shouting each other down, talking about, you don't know what you're talking about, and so and so and so and so, and we go into our Amos and Andy and Sapphire Act. Okay. VGQ means Victims Guaranteed Qualification. Guaranteed qualification to do what? To give your opinion on anything about race. Don't care what it is. If you're on there with Minister Farrakhan, or you're on there with Mike Tyson, or you're on there with Miss, what's her name, Williams, the lady that had him put in, recommended that he be put in jail, or you're on there with anybody. So you don't cut the other black person down. Now, I don't even like that term brother and sister, even though it's been around for about 30 years. But I ain't going to talk about the brother here, no. See, we haven't reached that stage where we can do that. See, we got to crawl before we walk, but we don't miss any steps. Don't say you are what you're not. Don't say you feel something that you don't really feel. You don't really feel that he's a brother. I usually use the expression, I don't like anybody in here. I say that to all audiences. I haven't been taught to like anybody. I've been taught to dislike people. Been taught that. Right. And then they taught to dislike me, so it's just compounded disliking. I haven't even got to love yet. All right? So what we do is minimize conflict, try not to hurt each other. So a certain thing, that's what a code is for. It's a stopgap. It keeps me from saying something against you. You say, well, don't you agree with what this person just said down here on the other end and whatnot? That person has VGQ, Mr. Donahue. I keep using him because he's one of the most prominent TV people. Right? But the main thing you do is try to stay off of a radio program or TV program or even a neighborhood stage program, you might say, where you spend your time shouting back and forth at other black people. Nothing is getting done there. And when it's done on television, a lot of black people just get up from the TV set and go on in the kitchen somewhere. Once that shouting starts. Yeah, they get disgusted. They say, oh, here we go. They started off okay, but now they're doing a job on each other and I don't even want to hear it. So just don't do it. And you cut it off. The cutoff point is that person has victims guaranteed qualification. You spell it out what it means. Meaning the person can say anything about race that they want to, and I can say anything about it that I want to. You are guaranteed that. You earn that as a victim. Simply by being a victim. Now, if a white person says something, that's something else.
Darn tootin'. We've been upsetting white guests for like a good week. Oh my goodness. It is unbelievable. I will say, if a white person had written the book that we talked about this evening, The Coroner's Silence, oh man, my conduct would have been way different. Way, way, way different. But that notwithstanding, I will say, hey, this is why we have a rule here at the Cows, white guests only. It needs to be understood as we are breaking a rule if there's a non-white guest on the program. We should be focusing on the problem people classified as white and the experts on what the system of white supremacy racism is. That also would be people classified as white. That notwithstanding, I will give myself a slight pat on the back. Very slight now. Yeah. We didn't have no cussing, fussing, shouting, name calling, clone what you say. None of that. No interrupting. Calm. You give your view. I give my view. Wow. Exchange of views. Now, I think in 17 years we've had a number of programs where we've spoken with victims of racism, and it was not shouting and cursing and I'll kill you and boy, if you were here I'd cut you good, boy. I think we've had, a few times where we've been able to exchange views, didn't agree on everything, which is probably rare, nigh on impossible. But we still, had hopefully mildly constructive exchange, maybe encourage, do some reading. So I will at minimum say that you might be in a situation where you have to converse with another victim of racism about racism or other constructive topics where you do not agree. And you will have to acknowledge that we do not agree. And see if we can follow logic, not be insulting, discourteous. We do not agree, and that's fine. Your view, my view, and we'll move forward. Maybe if we, remain in contact, we can both be truthful and we can see, hey, are there some so-called white allies? That's one thing I will say right quick. Man, the bar is so low for good white people. Wow, that would be just my personal opinion. In a system of white supremacy racism, it should be a lot. I mean, maybe they can't pay off your mortgage, depending on who the white person it is. Maybe they can. But, man, I mean, they showed up at a rally. They showed up at 50 rallies. They showed up to the march. They showed up to 50 marches. They had a protest sign. They got arrested at the march. They got a George Floyd tattoo. They voted for Obama 8 times. I mean, I'm even kind of running out of things. Like, bought 50 copies of Ta-Nehisi Coates' book. Whatever else, you think would be there. None of that stuff would qualify for me. None of that. I am not impressed. Not all white people is racist. That's just me. That's not my thought process. It is very easy for someone classified as white to do all deception. We talked about deceptive words, and they are crafty, and they have a long record of fooling us. So at least for me, no, I'm not going to be real quick to jump out and label like, oh man, Helen, they were at the rally last week, and they brought some great brownies too, like woof, chocolatey, fudgy as can be. But no, I mean, lots of white people come to the rallies. We've had lots of them. It would take even if they did pay off your mortgage, okay. Lots of white people have lots of money, and white people collectively have lots more nickels than non-white people. So even, matter of fact, are they paying off your mortgage in an area where we're going to gentrify it soon? Even if that's not the case, hopefully not. But just saying, I mean, we have very low standards for authenticating someone classified as white, as not racist, white ally, all around good dude. Be a little bit more discerning. Anyway, what else shall I say? Just for me, I guess I will also say I am not sure if we would have had Dr. Keel as a guest on the program in any other way. It had to be this way. I think if I had gone to see him in person and he had spoken the way he did tonight, and I wasn't doing the interview, like I just sat and listened to him say, he would have lost me at white ally. Like, in fact, it probably would have been 5 seconds. It would have been him getting up there and saying something, white ally, whatever, and I would have turned and looked at you all and said, that's exactly why. That is exactly why. White guest only. The only reason the rule was broken was because I missed out on seeing him in person. I thought I was going to be there so I could ask, front row, black person comes to Seattle. I was thinking, at least, I should go support so he can at least see one black face in the ocean, because it'd probably be a lot of people classified as white. Normally is not for Dorothy Roberts, but generally it's mostly white people at the bookstore, as it should be. So I was thinking, I'll go and support Black Brother and all that. And then, maybe I'll get to ask a question or two about racism. But then, and again, now we had a program that day, so it wasn't like I was just loafing, eating Cheetos, watching TV. We had a program, and I was still going to try and go, but I just could not make it. But missing out, I said, well, I'll see if we can get him on to compensate, and lo and behold. But I mean, I would not have broken my rule, and especially not that like that also. It really is a lot of things. I'm not a James Baldwin fan, and that's also, so what? But I've read a number of his books. White people required it frequently, but I'm not a fan. And generally at this point, any non-white person, any white person, anybody, we're talking about racism, and they mention James Baldwin, I already think, they are up to some nonsense. If it's a white person, they're going to practice racism, white supremacy, probably going to try and deceive me, lie, say something that's not logical. If it's a non-white person, I think they're not serious, they're not confused. That's what I think in my brain computer, like, immediately. I never hear, like, I was going to say it the other way, but 9 times out of 10, when I hear a non-white person say anything connected to James Baldwin, it's some nonsense. 9 times out of 10. It is very rare that I hear someone, and James Baldwin does have a few things that, are constructive. I've quoted him once in a while, but I do not now. Like, even I'm acknowledging he has a few things that are constructive, but because the overwhelming tendency is for people to cite incorrect things that he said, incorrect activities that he engaged in, anti-sexual. He was another one that thought not all white people are racist. All of that is not helpful, it's not accurate, and it's not scientific. That's what we need at this point. Not getting off into spirituality and rhetoric and poetry and science, man. What I said, we start talking, wait a minute. When we go in the court of law, we do not start talking we. It might be are we ready to proceed? And then from there on, I'm talking specifically to the defense. I'm talking specifically to the prosecution. It is binary. It is binary. And that's not what I said. That's what racist white supremacists said. You can't come in our neighborhood. This is a so-called sundown town. We don't want Jackie Robinson to play ball with us, UCLA great. We don't want him playing ball with us. The most powerful white people, that's what they said. Now, we can sit around and say, no, that ain't the case. Well, the people who run the world, they can show you better than I can tell you. That's what I mean. Like, we just need facts, not rhetoric and what would I wish it to be? What would I like it to be? What do I hope it to be? We don't have a democracy. We have to call things by their accurate name. Racists, they have thrashed us totally with all of that ambiguous language that he talked about. Now, that's one thing I will say. I would have probably missed that if I had not read the book. I thought that was massively important. Again, I'm biased. Context of White Supremacy, but racists do that all the time. That's one of the massive ways that they lie, to erode context and to use really convoluted language where you don't accurately describe things, or you take 5 days to describe something that could have been said in one sentence. We shot Johnny, and it's got to be, the projectile was launched in a standard procedural manner, and Leroy stumbled as the spinning projectile and Leroy tumbled in a northward direction at a high velocity with excited like, what? Lying. They do that all the time, and they encourage us to do that too, even to prize that. Just talking and not being accurate scientific at all. I say that all the time. Strive for accuracy. That's why even pointing out that double negative, because that is common in works on racism. And that double negative was important, saying it is not uncommon for police to request the reports be redacted. So wouldn't it be more impactful to say standard operating procedure is for police to erase constructive information from these reports? Now we get into it. What? All that, and I submit the same thing I've said about that with those double negatives and such, and sometimes it'll be the multiple negations. This book has an editor. For these professional books, Beacon Press and Random House and Simon and Schuster, sometimes it takes a full calendar year to get a book like this published. Many eyeballs, what they call peer-reviewed, many eyeballs go over this book and all that. A lot of people should look at a sentence like that and say, hey, man, even from a grammatical perspective, it's a double negative. This could be sharper. And for your point, it could be sharper. Reword. That doesn't happen. It is consistently vague. And I submit, thinking about the problem of white supremacy racism as a we, I submit that is an error. And the reason I say all the time, the metaphors, we got that metaphor about a burning house, and they're looking for blame and culpability doesn't matter. Victims guaranteed qualified. I submit that is totally false. That is not scientific, not logical at all. Why? Exactly what he said. Jonathan Metzl, white scholar, dying of whiteness, so-called. Could be dying of white supremacy, dying of white power, whatever. But he said, you got white people who say, I don't care about no Obamacare. Negroes shouldn't have been in the White House to begin with. But I don't care about no Obamacare. About to die. And some of them, they did. But before they killed, they said, no Obamacare. And Dr. Berkeley France, she told us when white people make that decision on their deathbed, that is a conscious decision to support the system of white supremacy, racism. And she told us, Berkeley France is a white woman, she told us white people who do this, they say they are acting in their self-interest, even in death. Keep them niggers from getting health care. Keep them niggers from getting health care. If that's true and that's what's happening, that needs to be that we think about and understand this to get this problem solved. And even now, the other big one is, same thing I keep saying, I'm by myself, I don't care. All of y'all, Fuller, everybody else, hey, at the end of the day, not all white people is racist. Is that true? And again, stop being retarded talking about white children. Stop being retarded talking about white people with Alzheimer's. You're being retarded. You're being retarded. Stop that. Is it true? Yes or no? If that is a lie, even, you don't even have to say it's a lie. Just if that's not true. Whew. I'm going to even pick his metaphor up for a minute. The reason why I say that is really dangerous and really not logical. If even you got one or two of these white people that we're hoping are allies, or hoping we can get them to be allies or work with us or not be racist or whatever, hey, house is on fire. Some of these white people are racist arsonists. This is April. I already told you what's April. Unofficial White Bomber Man Month. Is Tim McVeigh in the house? Is Ted Kaczynski in the house? The spawn of Sue Klebold. Are they in the house? Eric Rudolph, are they in the house? That's what I'm saying. I'm going to take the metaphor that was given. That's why I am humbly submitting. I could be wrong. I ain't founded no science lab. Might not let me back on the campus of UCLA. Dr. Keel get a paycheck from the Bruins. But I humbly submit. No, that is not the we. That's not how they talk when they go to court. You got plaintiffs, you got defendants. And we heard this a couple of days ago where that white man tried to tell us that white women, they also are victims of lynching. And I said the same thing. No. In a court of law, you got perpetrators and you got victims. Anyway, and it's, I won't say it's shocking, but it is very common when I hear non-white people, sometimes racist, not as frequently, but non-white people, when they mention, when I'm talking about, are all white people racist? And they pivot to, now you know, Leroy and Lakeisha, you know, some of these old black people, they not exactly your black brother and sister. Duh. We victims. That's part of our victimization. That's why I said, like, he would have impressed me if he had said, now Leroy gets a badge and he just goes and starts smacking around white people. Let me go find where Mark Furman lived. I know you didn't try to get O.J. Simpson in trouble and get you. Then I'd have been, that ain't what he said. I get my badge. I bet, matter of fact, why did they give me a badge? Huey P. Newton, unless I'm incorrect, migrated from Louisiana to California. They got upset. Hey, your dad a police officer, but they won't let him arrest no white people. He can only go smack, put his handcuffs on niggers. Duh. Who is to blame for that? People classified as white. I just find that, I mean, and non-white people are victims. We're still on the plantation, as Dr. Keel said, and you got people under domination. My goodness, it is so, man, black males beat up Fannie Lou Hamer. Now, do I want to go put their picture up and say, hey, we got oppressors in Mississippi. Look at these Negro men. Look at Leroy. Look at Jamal. Look at that. Look. And beat up old Fannie Lou Hamer. Ought to be ashamed of you. I guess we could do that. They even said, hey, we stay in Mississippi. Hey, Emmett Till, they said, black male participated in lynching Emmett Till. August 28, 1955. We want to go put them up. We don't forget, Bryant and all that. Forget all that, man. We go get black male who participate in all that. Put them. Come on. We get the black person who come and look after the slaves on the plantation. You get to say quitting time, so we fuss at them. We find black people that are confused and say that they want police and go fuss it. I think a black person wrote a whole book about that. It's not Hillary Clinton's fault. It's not Joe Biden's fault. It's not Bill Clinton's fault. It's black people's fault for asking for police in the 90s. That is not my perspective. Again, I do not believe not all white people are racist. I do not believe we can sit around and black people are to blame. All of us participate in the system of white supremacy racism, and white people are most to blame for that too. Trying to follow logic. Let's see, anything else to get in before? I do appreciate that he gave refuted the racist mythology around sickle cell anemia being a black person's disease. Not true. We've talked about that before. He does mention Ralph Ellison in the book, but I do not think the metaphor of white people being blind or having vision deficiencies, I think that is also woefully illogical and inaccurate to describe this problem. Again, white people, when they got Dylann Roof in the police car, it seems like they could see well enough to get to the Burger King. I ain't heard no report. They crashed through the drive-through window and, oh, Lord, they done knocked over the menu and Whopper sauces. I didn't hear that. They safely drove through the drive-through, came to a complete stop, paid for. I think they would have even had to pay for the burger too, right? You don't think they went and rifled through Dylann Roof's pockets and, you got $10 bill? Let me get that $10 bill. I'm going to give you a change. Just settle down. I'm going to give you a change. You think they went and did all that? I bet you they just paid for it. Woo! You, look here. Retired firefighter, Opalaka 3, you go out here and get arrested for having too many parking tickets. And they put you in the back seat of the car and tell them, I sure am hungry. I had to quiet down. Shut up, coon. Think we gonna stop and get you some KFC? You can have fried chicken crumbs all in the back. Shut up. Talking about how you should have thought of that before you got in trouble. Eat when we get to prison, maybe. They gonna stop at Church's Chicken and let him get a country ham. Like, are you see? And then pay for it. Dylann Roof, man. The Corey Stingley, spirit of Corey Stingley with us as well. Lou Alcindor, Jackie Robinson, Kobe Bryant, Bunchy Carter, and John Huggins, victim of the Black Panther U.S. slaves shootout at UCLA. Privileged black males both killed. They have a plaque to them at UCLA. I saw that quickly as I was rolling through on campus. I said Kobe Bryant. Kimberly Randall King, black female who died in custody in a Missouri prison, 2014 black mother. I wrote about her as well. Folks who had brief commentary, if any, to get in, make sure. I guess, let's see, Octavius in New York up there with Mom Donnie. I appreciate him talking about the new mayoral administration. Don't seem like they focused on helping out privileged black males. Black people in New York, they're done with Al Sharpton and all that. Since you had your turn with Mayor Adams, we're done with that, done with the black folks. Do you see any evidence that the white people's, young white people's, like under 20 white people in New York are behaving themselves and done with racism? Have you seen any evidence of that or any commentary you want to share about Dr. Keel?
Thanks, Gus. I appreciated his time. Some of his commentary I thought was, it makes you think, maybe analyze things politically. But some aspects I think were a little, I hate to use the phrase, but a little bit delusional almost. Not delusional in a disrespectful way, but just I don't think he has a clear understanding of just how bad the system of white supremacy is and white people in general are. And that's just my take on it. But his work, definitely important, definitely on point. As far as the Mondani thing, I just don't, unfortunately, I don't see it happening. I see a lot of these events and these things that are going on that are talking about redoing housing and education and all this stuff. It doesn't really center the people that are getting affected most, which is black and brown people, non-white people. It really centers white people, kind of like below average yuppies. Like, they're not quite making Wall Street money, but they're making enough money to, manage and live in the city. They just want their rent to go down, and I hate to oversimplify it, but there is nuance, but it ain't that much. But that said, I'll mute my line. I'm kind of curious to see some more of his work. I definitely appreciate him coming on.
UCLA, make sure I give out the full title, folks. Again, UCLA's Lab for BioCritical Studies. And then this book, The Coroner's Silence. He has other books as well that you can check out that also deal with racism, even work on eugenics. But just different view with regards to, and again, this is very common where it comes down to, now, not all white people are racist, ? And then so-called white allies. That is very common. Again, that's one I will wait to reserve judgment until the system is over. If there are any such white allies, we can identify them once this problem has been solved, and they should be very comfortable with that counter-racist logic given the history. Let's see. Retired firefighter, did you have thoughts you wanted to share before we wrap up?
Yes, sir. Every time I hear that word, white ally, it gives me nausea. That position has been within the system of racism, white supremacy, since the beginning of racism, white supremacy, whenever that was. But it's at least centuries ago. It's always been that way, and the problem is still here. It keeps going on and on and on. So whatever white people are doing who are identified in that way, it must have been contributing to the success of that problem. And, it's just like you've been saying, it's logic. It's logic to develop the understanding of that. If one would work that hard. I'm still a little bit confused. So I'm going to ask this question. Was the guest today a white person or a non-white person, Gus?
Black male. I asked him at the beginning of the program. Black male.
Whoa! No wonder I was kind of. I'm thinking it was a white person. Okay. Wow. Oh. Did you ask that person about? Did you give the person your definition, and the person, and what did he say if you did give your definition of racism, white supremacy?
No. When we break the rule and have a non-white person on the program, I stopped asking them my definition because frequently they do not agree, or we just waste a lot of time, and it takes away from being able to get to other subject matter. So what I did, as opposed to that, I said some time ago, when we break the rule, I ask the guest what their definition of racism is, which I did today with Dr. Keel, and he gave his definition before he departed.
Okay. Therefore, now I'm clear now that the level of what I identify as confusion is now in place in my mind about how he was talking, being that it was a non-white person. Okay. Thank you.
For sure. He identified at the very beginning of the program, as we normally do, get racial identity of the guessed out there from the very beginning for folks who've not seen them or don't, want to take any time to go look and let me see what this person looks like and all that stuff. But Dr. Keel, black male, who is visiting with us, and he might submit, hey, I got better credentials than all of you combined and tripled. So don't be talking about me confused. Y'all confused. You the ones that got it together. And I know we got all of it. No problem. Victims guaranteed qualified. That's his view. I would just, again, the metaphors, that's something that I talk about, particularly in an environment, as we did agree on, all of that deliberate racist jargon to not be clear and precise, even intelligible when you write and these are supposed to be official documents. Like, this is not some text message that you're writing after you've been at the bar celebrating the Bruins championship win or whatever. This is supposed to be serious. We're writing a report about someone's final breath on this earth. And we're talking about deaths in police custody. So, this is official business. And it's not even highfalutin. It is just straight nonsense to lie and deceive people about crimes, murders in some cases. That's why. Be precise with language. There's already too much of that going on already. Not people out of confusion, willful deception, ignorance, combination of factors, but there's already enough of that. Really use correct terms, especially if we're talking about racism. I guess if you're talking about video games or whatever, but at least when we talk about white supremacy racism, strive for accuracy. And that's like the pronouns. I cannot say that enough. I don't even say we in terms of now we non-white people think, because we all don't think the same way, and which is fine. That's to be expected. But like all encompassing we, especially even a statement, we are all to blame for the system of white supremacy racism. Now, is Devontae to blame? 7 years. I don't think I would have known that if we had not had Dr. Keel speak with us today, that today is 7 years. I think we're 7 years to the day, not of the murder, but 7 years to that inquest ending and them giving that nonsense, exactly what I just said, at the hands of another by other than an accident. Death at the hands of another person by other than an accident. I don't even think they said person. It was just death at the hands of another by other than an accident. That was it. Like the most convoluted what? That's and that's Devontae, where we didn't even get his remains. And Vontae out giving hugs. I guess Vontae forced to believe not all white people are racist. Got a sandwich? Anything I could eat? Now, Dylann Roof, he got something to eat. Devontae and them, they got starved, drugged, and drowned. We will be here at minimum on Thursday, neutralizing workplace racism, and then Friday, Dr. Colin Anthony Beckles. Hey, where is he an alumnus? UCLA. That's where he did his dissertation on racists keeping black people out of books. In fact, there's the fire again. The racist arsonists, they come to burn down the black bookstore. That's Friday. Any hoodles. Much obliged for folks being here. I don't think we were rude, trifling, nasty. Even after, I think we were other than Octavius and New York calling my privilege, or not privileged, but, well, yeah, because he is privileged. Black man, he at UCLA. Our privileged black brother, Dr. Terence Keel, saying that he was delusional. Other than that, like, I think everybody was courteous, respectful, appreciative of his time, just pointing out we had slight difference of opinion. And as I said, hey, we can keep paying attention. I'm striving to be universal man, so if we do find some white allies who invest in the cows, racism-notes.blogspot.com, PayPal button if we got any white allies, well-meaning white people who are not racist, and say, hey, we're going to prove you wrong, Gus T. We're going to prove you wrong. There you go. Hit the Cash App, PayPal, Amazon wish list. Hit it up, and then I can come on and say, wow, my white brothers, man, I got to reconsider. I don't think that's going to happen, though. Did retired firefighter Octavius in New York, we were relatively courteous. We didn't get into no Negro. I mean, he did hang out. He didn't storm off in a tizzy. Both sides, when he was here and after he left, we were still courteous, not rude, professional. Even you all, well, other than the delusional, we got a little, rather. Other than that, everybody was professional, courteous with Dr. Keel.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, I said it in like not trying to be disrespectful when I said it, because not, the man is working, he's trying to do his thing, he's trying to solve the problem, just going about it a different way. I should say maybe a bit confused. That's better, if anything. We're all still confused, still learning. So, yeah, everything was cool.
Much obliged.
I was about to say, I was being like that, and I thought it was a white person.
Oh, okay. Okay. Right on. Definitely not a white person. We did not put that on you, Dr. Keel. Black male, privileged black male. Dr. Terence Keel has pictures at his UCLA website and the book and all that good stuff. Definitely black dude. Any hoodles. The book again, the Coroner's Silent Death Records and the Hidden Victims of Police Violence. I cannot, like, the evidence also, like, this should be like gendered violence, in my opinion. Like that, I guess that would be other, like, last tidbit to add before we sign out. This is super black dudes in terms of who does this impact now. Yes, white people die in custody, black females die in custody, so-called Asian people, yeah. Wow, it is super disproportionately black males dying in police custody at the hands of police, or once they get them locked up or whatever. Like, man, that pops up over and over and over. In fact, before we sign out, that's the one I can get in before we sign out. He writes, he mentioned Helen Jones, her son, died in custody. And that kind of started her on, John Horton, that's his name, that kind of started her on her effort to replace white supremacy with justice and make improvements in the policing conditions. Even I'm reminded, Neely Fuller Jr., what's one of his favorite movies? Shawshank Redemption. Why? He said, hey, that's an accurate representation. You get locked up, expect to die. He said that was the understanding for decades. The whole time that he grew up, that was going to prison. You get locked. Oh, never gonna see him again. Anywho, so this is Helen Jones, very beginning of the book, chapter 1. Helen had been asking similar questions for nearly a decade after losing her son, John Horton. His death had been set in motion by a health crisis that began on the night of February 23, 2009. That's like 2 weeks after Obama was inaugurated, maybe 3 weeks. During a visit with his cousin, John had begun vomiting. He couldn't stop. As his breath worsened, the family called 911 and requested paramedics. When they arrived, John was rushed to St. Francis Medical Center in Linwood, a small predominantly black and Latino community of Los Angeles, less than 5 miles from Men's Central Jail. The nursing staff said he might have had a PCP overdose, but the blood screen they gave John for controlled substances only showed evidence of THC in his system. After a few hours of monitoring, the medical staff released John to his mother and sister. The next morning, the symptoms returned. Again, the family called 911, requesting paramedics. This time, they were accompanied by officers from the Los Angeles County's Sheriff's Department, who were there to arrest John for failing to participate in a court-ordered drug program. Having lived in Watts for most of her adult life, Helen recognized one of the deputies. He was an officer with a reputation for sending black males to the county jail. And that'll be the point that I end with. I didn't see no portion of this text, and I didn't hear from Dr. Keel while we spoke to him about no officer, white or non-white, with a reputation for locking up white people, males or females, LGBTQ, transgender, elderly, disabled, neurodiverse, none. I didn't hear about no officer with a reputation for locking up black females. I didn't hear about no officer with a reputation for locking up so-called Latinas, Latinos, Latinx. None of it. Just Leroy. And that's over and over and over. Black dudes, black dudes, black dudes. But then it's got to be, wait, everybody gets like that. Even situations where clearly, and I even, as I read it, because it was so stark, I said, man, it's like it's understood. It's supposed to be black males here. You are a white sacrifice. Really, you're a white person, and you end up here. To some degree, you've been black mailed. You might be white sacrificed and treated like a black male. Now, with that thinking, it's almost a cliche. White person, you go to prison, what you do? You join the white supremacist prison gang. Now, that's not everybody, but I mean, that is almost jail cliche. Then they say they had that report about the group that came over, foreign delegation. They came to look at the prisons. They said, man, that's interesting. We see where you keep your niggers. Where's the prison for the white people? Everybody looked around and said, oh my God, it's so embarrassing. And this was like recent. I think this might have been like 21st. Anyway, we'll be here Thursday, neutralizing workplace racism. You all locate any white allies, young whiteys. They say, hey, I don't do no racism. I don't do no racist jokes. I'm cool with black people. Racists, they got a problem with me. You find any young white people, or white people, period. They don't have to be young, but especially young. But you find any white people who act like that. Wow. Send them to racism-notes.blogspot.com. Tell them to invest royally, and then have them come hang out on a program so we can chat it up and indefinitely until this problem is solved. Sobriety would be best. They just say, hey, they get you with THC in your system. You already know. You had excited delirium and drapetomania and about 15 other ailments that we'll make up and add on there and say, oh yeah, and he had cocaine in the system and PCP and fentanyl and oh my God, yeah, the opioids, all the rest of it, some pain medication and mad dog. Like, oh yeah, he was acting a fool and we had to shoot him 15 times. Yeah. Sobriety would be best. Creator, we ask that you remind us we are not looking for white allies. Again, I have concluded this problem, white supremacy, racism, global system, can be solved. We do not need white people to solve this problem. Billions of non-white people on the planet. Really? We can't get a good million of them together and take care of business? Really? I think we can do that. That seems very reasonable. Sobriety would be best. What we need is stop saying not all white people are racist. I think that is very debilitating, most importantly because it's not true. spirit of Lou Alcindor, spirit of Jackie Robinson, spirit of Bunchy Carter, spirit of John Huggins, spirit of Kimberly Randall King, spirit of Kobe Bryant, still with us, maybe reminding us, stop saying not all white people are racist. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.